Choi Hyuk stood firmly on the ground in the middle of the park. He had efficiently taken down his opponent with a single blow, his fist still clenched. Regardless of age, size, or the number of opponents, he instinctively knew how to fight, and he could defeat them all. Worried that Hyuk might get hurt fighting older people, his mother asked him about the scars on his face. One day, Hyuk was dragged away by 5 teenagers who were trying to rob him. Despite his warning for them to let him go, the youths refused, wicked smiles spreading across their faces and revealing their ill intentions. One of them lunged at Hyuk, forcing him into a fight. Hyuk stopped holding back. When his mother found out, she ran to look for him, but she was devastated. She collapsed after hearing that one of the attackers had been left blind and another had died instantly from a severe head injury. Hyuk was taken to the police station for homicide, but he was not criminally prosecuted because he was a minor. Broken, his mother begged him not to leave and tearfully asked him to never hit anyone again. Realizing that her son was like a weapon, she asked him to endure humiliation as punishment for having taken a life. Years passed. Hyuk grew up and entered his classroom. There, he came face to face with Bien Kanho and Lee Minnie. Minnie lunged forward and punched Hyuk in the stomach, demanding that he speak. While Minnie grabbed his head and asked him what he had eaten for breakfast, Hyuk tried to laugh it off and replied that he hadn't eaten anything. Lee pointed at Minji, who was eating, and asked Hyuk if he knew what he was supposed to do now. Embarrassed Minji, the student council president and the top-ranked student in the entire school, quickly turned her head away. Miho took control of the situation and threatened Hyuk, asking whether he had finished his math homework. Hyuk searched his backpack and said that this time he had written the solution process correctly. Miho took the notebook and hit Hyuk as a form of thanks, saying he would have made him repeat the year if he had gotten it wrong again. Hanung, feeling hungry, threatened Hyuk and demanded his wallet. Nervous, Hyuk took it out of his backpack and handed it over. During class, Hyuk kept nodding his head. Minji noticed that he wouldn't look so intimidated if he stopped doing that, since it only made him seem nervous. Although the gesture annoyed her, Hyuk was actually analyzing how rusty he had become in combat, and how difficult it was to pretend he didn't know how to fight. An image of himself formed in his mind, and he wondered whether he could defeat Minnie instinctively and efficiently. But he immediately realized what he was thinking. Hyuk began nodding again, as if trying to shake off those murderous thoughts and atone for his sins. He was determined never to fight again, and began wondering why everyone seemed so weak. Suddenly, something behind Hyuk caught his attention. A blue orb appeared in midair and began spinning violently around the classroom, pushing everything and everyone in its path. The orb quickly transformed into a bubble, leaving everyone stunned. The students pulled out their phones to communicate, but the screens went black. Minnie tried to open the door, but it didn't move an inch. Someone shouted, "Minnie, get away from the door!" Miho ran toward it and kicked it hard, injuring his leg, while Hyuk watched in confusion, wondering why Miho was kicking a sliding door. The teacher tried to calm everyone down and instructed them to sit on the floor. Amid the chaos, some students noticed writing on the front of the ring. Confused by its sudden appearance, everyone began to read it. The rules of the Ring of Rebirth were revealed. Han-sung was thrilled and wondered if it was real. While some worried about the possibility of people being eliminated, the teacher continued trying to maintain control, telling the students not to move until they fully understood the situation. Panic began to grow as they wondered how long they would be trapped and whether the rules were true. Hyuk, by comparison, remained calm and accepted the possibility of starving to death. Suddenly, Hyuk's attention shifted when the teacher shouted at Minnie to get off the ring. Despite repeated warnings, Minnie refused, feeling trapped and bored, while Han-sung smiled maliciously behind him. All of a sudden, Minnie began to perceive multiple statistical abilities. With a confident grin, he crouched down and leaped into the air. Realizing that his physical capabilities had improved, his classmates estimated that he had jumped over a meter high, stunned by his superhuman strength. Understanding the power of karma, Minnie began to believe that the rules of the Ring of Rebirth might be real. With a wicked smile, he pointed at Gil-soo and called him onto the ring. Gil-soo froze as everyone stared in shock. Suddenly, something shoved him from behind. No one knew who had done it. An unknown force began dragging Gil-soo toward the ring. Minji ran forward in panic and grabbed him from behind, begging others for help. Everyone, including Hyuk, rushed in and grabbed onto different parts of Gil-soo's body to stop him from being pulled away. However, the force was too strong and tore him from their grasp. A bubble suddenly appeared, preventing anyone else from approaching the ring. The barrier kept them out. Minnie, jealous that Minji had hugged Gil-soo, stood menacingly in front of him. Minnie questioned Minji's loyalty, driven by envy, while Hyuk and Minji were left confused by what was happening. Minnie shuddered in realization. The rules were real. Gil-soo began to panic, trembling with fear. Although Minnie had the advantage, fear also crept into him. He understood the seriousness of the situation, but the beast lurking inside him fed his malice and thirst for power. Minnie wrapped his arm around Gil-soo's neck in a chokehold. Gil-soo began to suffocate, his strength slowly fading as Minnie tightened his grip. The teacher screamed desperately, while the students could only watch the grotesque scene unfold. Gil-soo nearly lost consciousness, and loosened his grip on Minnie's arm. The other students were horrified by Minnie's ruthless brutality. Gil-soo collapsed to his knees, slowly losing consciousness. Suddenly, even on the verge of blacking out, he tightly grabbed Minnie's forearm. Digging his feet into the ground, he slowly forced himself back up. Still trapped in the chokehold, he clenched Minnie's arm and struggled to break free. With a violent motion, Gil-soo tore Minnie's shirt as he escaped the hold, leaving deep marks on his forearm. Breaking free, he surged forward, forcing Minnie to stumble back under the sheer power of his charge. Gil-soo paused in disbelief, staring at the torn piece of Minnie's shirt still clenched in his hand. Minnie stared at him in shock, nearly having his arms torn apart by Gil-soo's strength. Gil-soo clenched his fist, realizing he could win this fight. Enraged by Minnie's actions, he charged forward and landed a direct punch to Minnie's face, sending him staggering backward. Gil-soo slowly relaxed his fists as he pushed Minnie toward the center of the ring. He stared at his own hand, realizing the strength he now possessed. With renewed confidence, he clenched his fists again and charged forward once more. Meanwhile, Hyuk stood beside the ring, analyzing the fight. He knew it was pointless for Gil-soo to charge straight at Minnie. Although Gil-soo was stronger, Minnie was faster and had a longer reach. Just as Hyuk predicted, Minnie landed a devastating right hook. Gil-soo stayed on his feet and charged again, but Minnie's longer arms and reach put him at a disadvantage. Minnie landed another jab and, spotting an opening, threw a left hook. Gil-soo dodged it easily, but Minnie immediately followed up with a right. As the fight continued, Hyuk reflected on the reality of the situation. He had once been weak, and Minnie was only pretending to be strong. If this were broadcast on television, people would laugh it off as a childish fight. But the reality was pure cruelty. Minnie landed a powerful jab to Gil-soo's face, causing the classroom windows to rattle. Yet the true power came from the ring. It granted Gil-soo the strength and endurance of a bull, and Minnie the speed and agility of a deer. In an instant, Minnie stepped in and delivered a brutal close-range hook straight to Gil-soo's face. Without the power of karma, Gil-soo would have ended up in the hospital with broken bones. Even so, he endured the blow. Fueled by rage, Gil-soo immediately leaped toward Minnie and threw a powerful uppercut, but Minnie barely dodged it. The students could only watch, shaken and speechless at the incredible physical abilities of both fighters. Minnie was stunned by Gil-soo's endurance and resilience. Encouraged, Gil-soo steeled himself for one more strike. He took a fighting stance, fists firm as stone, and prepared to attack again. However, his stamina was beginning to fail. Blood poured from his nose and mouth. Even so, he charged at Minnie without hesitation. Minnie anticipated the attack, slid aside, and countered with another powerful jab that struck Gil-soo square in the face. Minnie pressed the attack as Gil-soo nearly lost his balance. Closing the distance, he unleashed a brutal uppercut straight to Gil-soo's face. The blow was devastating. Several teeth were knocked out, and Gil-soo collapsed unconscious. Broken teeth scattered across the ring. Consumed by malice, Minnie seized control, grabbing Gil-soo by the head and raining down blow after blow. He pummeled his face repeatedly, sending waves of panic through the classroom. Each strike was more vicious than the last. Exhausted and dying, Gil-soo tried to beg, but Minnie didn't stop. Blood splattered across the classroom as the students turned away, unable to bear the horrific sight. To finish him off, Minnie delivered a final barrage of savage blows to Gil-soo's face. At last he stopped and looked down at him. Gil-soo's head was completely crushed, blood pooling across the floor. The students stared in horror at the massacre. Then, slowly, Gil-soo's hand began to crumble into ashes. Confused, Minnie watched as his entire body disintegrated into dust. Some of the particles drifted into his nose. Gil-soo was gone. As the others panicked, Hyuk stood frozen, watching a human being vanish before his eyes. He saw the blood-soaked floor and witnessed the final breath of a life. It reminded him of his own past, back when he was in 6th grade. Hyuk remembered how easy it had been to kill that middle school student. However, It was his mother who had truly mourned that death. It had been the first, and last, time he had ever committed murder. This time, someone else had done it. But Minnie's attitude was completely different. Suddenly, an overwhelming energy surged through his body. He realized he had become much stronger. He understood that this surge in power had come from killing Gil-soo. Consumed by greed, Minnie decided to kill everyone to become even stronger. He slowly turned with a sinister smile, searching for his next opponent. His gaze settled on a weaker classmate, Yoon Kareem. Terrified by Minnie's cruelty, Kareem began to panic, convinced the same fate awaited her. Not just her. Most of the students were frozen in fear. They realized that the Ring of Rebirth had turned Lee Minnie into a merciless demon. Just like Gil-soo, Kareem was dragged toward the ring by an unknown force. Desperate, she screamed for help as she was pulled by the leg. Minji quickly grabbed Kareem's hand and tried to stop her from being dragged into the ring. The other students remained frozen, thinking that even if they helped, Kareem would end up just like Gil-soo. Minji helped Kareem back to her feet, though she was still completely traumatized. Without hesitation, Minji shouted that she would fight Minnie, leaving Kareem in shock. However, Minji was simply taking advantage of the second rule of the Ring of Rebirth. Kareem broke down in tears. As Minji stepped onto the ring, Kareem cried uncontrollably, convinced Minji would end up just like Gil-soo. Minnie was surprised to see Minji on the ring, and the other students were left speechless by her decision. Minji began stretching her arms. Minnie smiled and asked if she really intended to fight him. Minji remained silent, an answer in itself. He immediately accepted the challenge. As Minji warmed up, Minnie offered her another chance to back out. Confident, Minji replied with a mocking smile. She finished stretching and stood in front of him. With a faint smile, she insulted him and prepared to fight. Minnie laughed, convinced she was insane. With open hands and a sinister grin, Minnie lunged at her. Within seconds he grabbed her shoulders and slammed her to the ground. Just as he had done with Gil-soo, he took control of Minji almost immediately. He moved closer with clear malicious intent. Driven by lust, he tried to tear off her clothes before even attacking her. Minji felt powerless and trapped inside her own body. Distracted and almost enjoying himself, Minnie tried to rip her dress apart. As he forced the buttons, one shot off from the pressure, spinning through the air and striking Minnie in the face. The button fell to the floor, and in that instant, he knew something was wrong. Minnie realized it too late. Minji had stabbed him in the head with a tool. While he was distracted by lust instead of his thirst for power, Minji seized the moment and attacked. Minnie began losing consciousness even before the button hit the ground. Minji pulled the sharp tool from his head, blood spraying everywhere, and shoved Minnie to the floor as he bled unconscious. Before the fight had even truly begun, Minnie was defeated by his own lust. The button landed afterward, soaked in blood. Taking a deep breath, Minji tried to steady herself while tightly gripping the needle she had found in a toolbox. She knew the basics of human biology. A penetrating head wound was fatal. She had calmly waited for the perfect moment, exploiting the fact that Minnie was completely distracted. Her classmates were stunned by the tactic Minji had used to secure her victory. Minji stood up and stepped off the ring. Kareem tearfully thanked her for saving her, but Minji looked disappointed. She ignored the gratitude and confronted her with the harsh truth. If she didn't become stronger, she would eventually die. Kareem froze in fear upon hearing those words. Minji easily opened the classroom door, something that had been impossible for everyone else. Before leaving, she told Kareem that she hadn't intervened just to save her, and that she needed to kill while she still could, or die meaninglessly. The door allowed only Minji to leave and immediately shut, preventing anyone else from escaping. While the students were still reeling from what had happened, Miho stepped onto the ring, complaining about the noise. His gaze fell on Hyuk. He challenged him to enter the ring and fight. With an expressionless face, Hyuk tried to grasp the situation he was in. Hyuk knew Miho was different from Minnie. He had shown no mercy to Gil-soo. He also understood that even Minji had killed without hesitation to survive. But now he realized something else. He was no longer the only murderer. They all were. Hyuk smiled bitterly, as if he no longer wished to hold himself back. He was like a beast born among chicks. Whenever the beast touched one, it died easily. But his mother had told him the problem wasn't the chicks, it was the beast itself. Since then, the beast had lived like a dog among them, enduring their pecking without reacting. Miho was one of those who believed he could kill the beast because it looked weak. But the beast awakened. Hyuk stepped onto the ring. As he ascended, he looked at Miho, and realized the previous fight had been nothing but an illusion. Even so, he needed to confirm it for himself. Standing before Miho, he began to tremble, aware that the weaker one would die. Miho smiled maliciously and told him not to be afraid. He even remarked that Hyuk was lucky they were in the same weight class. Hyuk tried to laugh, but the beast had already been unleashed. Consumed by rage, Miho attacked Hyuk with the intent to beat him to death. Although Hyuk was taller, Miho was convinced he was weak. However, remembering Gil-soo, he realized Hyuk could become strong at any moment once he received karma. Miho felt the power of karma the moment he stepped onto the ring, like in a video game, and noticed Hyuk hadn't received it yet. Determined to exploit the advantage, he closed the distance and charged with all his strength. He managed to grab Hyuk and smiled perversely, convinced he had already won. But in the next instant, Miho was confused. He saw the ceiling lights, blood floating in the air, and his classmates lying face down. He realized he was surrounded by blood, as if caught in a grotesque joke. The others could only watch in horror. Miho lost consciousness instantly. Blood burst violently from his jaw and neck. It had been Hyuk's devastating right knee, which countered the takedown attempt and snapped Miho's neck with overwhelming force. As Miho's head fell and his body bled out, Hyuk remained calm, though consumed by the fury of the beast. The beast Hyuk had suppressed for so long could no longer be restrained or controlled. Like Minnie and Gil-soo, Miho's head began to vanish. His body disintegrated into particles of dust. Within seconds, Miho disappeared completely, his shirt fading away as well. With an empty expression, Hyuk realized he had won the battle against Miho. His classmates were stunned by his immense physical strength. Hyuk felt Miho's blood on his pants, near the knee he had used to counterattack. Feeling a deep emptiness, he stared at it for a few seconds. Suddenly, a message appeared before him, leaving him stunned. The ring granted him 10 bonus points for defeating his opponent before karma had been distributed, increasing his karmic points. The message also displayed the distribution of his stats. Hyuk realized he had absorbed part of Kang Miho's statistics, and understood that Miho had possessed great endurance due to his extra stamina points. Suddenly, Hyuk felt something flow from his hand into his body. It was karma. The sensation was strange, yet it strengthened his muscles and tendons, allowing explosive movement. Hyuk clenched his fist and felt karma surge through him. Intrigued by this power, he wanted to test it and understand it better. But his mother's words crossed his mind once again. He shook his head hard, trying to erase any thoughts of killing. He was done with murder. He quickly searched for a way to escape. After defeating an opponent, he thought about leaving the way Minji had. But his instincts told him he had to keep fighting, and his attention shifted to someone else. His eyes fell on Hanung, known for bullying others. Hyuk considered him a threat, fearing he might kill the weak to survive. The thought deeply frustrated him. Han-sung began to pray and beg for mercy. He dropped to his knees, apologizing and admitting he had been wrong for being a bully. At that moment, Hyuk noticed something strange. One of Han-sung's eyes turned red for an instant before returning to normal. As Han-sung continued apologizing, confused by what had happened, Hyuk sensed something disturbing in his gaze. Han-sung confessed that he regretted everything he had done. However, Hyuk didn't fully believe him. He suspected that, when the time came, Han-sung might kill the weak. Han-sung insisted he wouldn't hurt anyone and that he would stay quiet. After hearing his plea, Hyuk hesitated over what to do. At that moment, Han-sung suddenly pulled a weapon from his pocket, a box cutter. A strange red glow enveloped Han-sung. Blinded by rage, he lunged at Hyuk with the intent to kill him. The blade grazed Hyuk's face. Though he dodged most of it, the edge left a shallow cut. In an instant, Hyuk countered with a powerful punch straight to Han-sung's jaw. The impact nearly lifted him off the ground and knocked him unconscious. The box cutter fell and shattered against the floor. Han-sung dropped to his knees again, this time completely unconscious, his face bleeding from Hyuk's precise and brutal counterattack. Hyuk tried to understand why Han-sung's eyes had turned red, as if something had possessed him in that moment. The blow had been so strong that foam formed at Han-sung's mouth, but Hyuk realized he was only unconscious, not dead. Conflicted, he wondered if he should kill him with his own hands. Then his attention shifted. Looking around, he saw his classmates still watching the grotesque scene. He realized it was already too late. He had become a monster, a killer. Hyuk opened his hands and stepped toward Han-sung's unconscious body. He placed his hands around his neck and began to strangle him. Han-sung tried to resist, but soon stopped struggling. Like the others, his body disintegrated into particles of dust while Hyuk was still choking him. Hyuk stood up and brushed off his shirt, now covered in dust from the disintegration. He rubbed his hands clean as well. With Han-sung gone, He thought it was finally over. As he stared at the karmic points message before him, he realized this was not the end, and that he would never find happiness if the fighting continued. At that moment, Hyuk realized something else. He turned and looked at his classmates and the classroom. He wondered how far this supernatural phenomenon extended, whether it covered the entire school, all of Gangdong, or something even greater. His curiosity quickly turned into concern for his mother, and whether she was safe. The hallway and classroom were dimly lit. The windows were smeared with blood as fierce battles erupted between students. Some, intoxicated by bloodshed, used weapons like hammers to kill brutally. Others, who didn't want to fight, were forced to do so just to survive. The situation was like an anchor dragging everyone mercilessly to the bottom of the sea. After the massacre, only a handful were still alive. Yun Karim, who had previously been chosen by Lee Mini, remained terrified after witnessing the chaos. Min Bungai, shy yet popular, caught the teacher's attention. With no other way to escape, the teacher selected Bungai for a duel. Fear consumed Bungai, fully aware that he couldn't defeat his teacher. The teacher confronted him and quickly strangled him until he lost consciousness, ending his life shortly afterward. Having witnessed all those atrocities, Kareem was deeply traumatized and began to panic as she felt her life was in danger. The teacher stared at her in silence. When he exited the classroom, Kareem begged him to save her, overwhelmed by terror, wondering whether this was all a dream or if she would be trapped there forever. Meanwhile, Hyuk ran toward a window with all his strength, but the barrier protecting it violently repelled him, slamming him to the floor. Seeing the power of the barrier, he realized it was impossible to break through. He got up immediately and sprinted down the hallway, desperately searching for an exit from the school. As he ran, thoughts of his mother resurfaced again and again, destabilizing him. He imagined someone strangling her at that very moment. That single thought made Hyuk lose control. He immediately kicked the nearby window again, but the barrier didn't move even an inch. Hyuk threw a powerful punch, followed by a kick, trying to shatter it. He unleashed several more blows, hoping to destroy the barrier and escape through the window. However, he exhausted all his stamina and collapsed to the ground just as a strange red message appeared on the glass. Hyuk stared in shock at the red text. The message implied that he needed to become even angrier, and only then would he be able to kill. Hyuk let out a deep sigh as the message vanished. He began to wonder who had created this game, and what their true intentions were. He shook his head, clearing his thoughts, until he realized something. In frustration, he slammed the door beside him. As he continued down the hallway, he understood that to survive until the end, he would have to become either a killing machine or a slave to the system. Only then would he be able to stand face to face with the game's creators. And when that moment came, he wanted to beat them all to death. The gymnasium was the only place students could go after leaving the classroom. Several people were already there, but all of them had killed someone and remained on edge, keeping their distance. Hyuk entered the gym and spotted Nji sitting near the entrance. She looked at him in surprise but said nothing. As more people entered the gym, another yellow message appeared, announcing that a bonus game had begun and that a rest period was being granted to prepare for what lay ahead. Confused, Hyuk estimated that around 30 students were currently inside. However, upon reading that the previous game had not yet ended, he realized that more people would continue to arrive over time. A room hidden behind a red curtain on the balcony caught his attention. Thinking he needed to get ahead of the others to win the bonus game, he went inside, but it turned out to be nothing more than a locker room filled with lockers and chairs. Hyuk frantically searched for anything useful, even checking a nearby trash bin. Exhausted, he stopped when he noticed something on the floor. Hyuk found a katana. He picked it up and drew it to see if it was real, and sharp enough to kill. The moment others saw him holding a weapon, they were stunned. Within seconds, everyone scattered and began searching every corner of the gym for weapons. Some even checked the electrical supply box, while others tried to flee and hide. However, Hyuk didn't stop after finding the katana. He continued exploring until another room caught his eye. He noticed another red curtain and, driven by curiosity, pulled it aside. He froze when he saw what was behind it, a hidden rule. Hidden rule number 9 stated that if a person killed more than 5 people, they would awaken an innate ability and become a king without subjects. As he read, the message began to tremble and eventually dissolved into the air. The glowing dust from the message flowed into Hyuk's body before disappearing completely. Hyuk stood motionless, trying to grasp its meaning, as the curtain fluttered beside him. From the outside, the gym seemed calm, but inside chaos erupted. Students began fighting one another over scattered weapons. Some tried to take advantage of the situation, Even Professor Lee and another teacher were struggling over a weapon while others continued searching for useful items. Amid the disorder, another person entered the gym, confused by what was happening. They wondered what everyone was searching for, until a leg passed right over their head. They looked up and saw Hyuk climbing along the gym ceiling, searching for anything that might give him an edge in the bonus game. Even though they had already found another sword, they were astonished by Hyuk's agility and acrobatic skill. Inspired by the sight, they decided they couldn't afford to lose to him. Using the balcony as support, they leapt explosively toward the ceiling. As the chaos continued, a golden light appeared at the center of the stage. When its brightness faded, it was revealed to be another yellow message, announcing that both the rest period and the previous game had ended. The commotion stopped instantly, and everyone focused on the rules of the bonus game. Each participant had found at least one piece of armor and a weapon, making them far more dangerous. Hyuk, on the other hand, had obtained only 3 weapons and no armor. All of them were F rank: a Japanese katana for slashing, a bastard sword for slashing and thrusting, and a rapier-type weapon designed solely for thrusting. Nevertheless, Hyuk had discovered 5 hidden rules of the throne game, hidden rules number 5, 6, 7, 9, and 15. After reading them, he realized that the current game was not a throne game, but a bonus game. Using those rules, he understood that the throne game involved declaring oneself king and gathering subordinates to claim the throne. Rules 9 and 15 were connected by the concept of a king without subjects, and it was clear that this was an incomplete rule, designed to be discovered only in hard-to-reach places. The reward was a D-rank weapon, far superior to F-rank gear, so he knew he had to obtain it. He decided to focus solely on rule number 9 and abandon rules 5, 6, and 7. Hyuk resolved to prove his worth to the game's creators. Both the reward and the title of king without subjects were acceptable to him. He only needed to kill 3 more people. The conditions to become a king without subjects were killing 5 people and awakening an innate ability, something he had already accomplished. His ability, Eyes of Distinction, allowed him to see others' intentions. The red and black flashes he had seen in Han's song indicated murderous and hostile intent. In a world where no one knew what others were thinking, the Eyes of Distinction were an unparalleled ability. Suddenly, an intense golden light caught Hyuk's attention. A massive, transparent golden cube appeared out of nowhere, startling the other students. Soon after, multiple cubes began appearing throughout the gym, causing widespread panic. The bonus game rules stated that this was a golden opportunity to obtain an E-rank item. If a dropout, identified by an item mark, died, or if a dropout killed someone, the mark would disappear and karma points would be awarded. However, everyone was confused about who or what these dropouts actually were. Suddenly, people appeared inside the cubes. Startled by the phenomenon, everyone quickly turned their attention toward them. At first, no one understood what was happening, but its meaning soon became clear. The people who appeared with item marks above their heads were those who hadn't fought to the end and had remained in their classrooms. They were the only ones who hadn't killed anyone. Among them was Kim, who was from Hyuk's class. That meant only one thing: to obtain items, they would have to kill the most innocent people. The group split into 2 factions. The first consisted of those who gave up, didn't know what to do, and chose not to act, despite being the majority. The second faction split further. One group decided they had to kill to obtain items, while the other resolved not to let their friends die. While those unwilling to act watched, the others slowly began surrounding the item cubes. Suddenly, someone swung a spiked metal baseball bat, attempting to strike a dropout. However, they failed to hit her and wondered why. Then they realized the bonus game hadn't started yet. As the dropout cried and begged for her life, someone stepped forward to protect her. Professor Kim tried to shield her, appealing to the students' morality and attempting to calm the situation. The students recognized him as Professor Kim, but everyone was armed and dangerous. One of them shouted that everyone there was a murderer, and that they had all arrived there after killing at least one person. Overwhelmed by guilt, Professor Kim accepted the reality. He realized that even he had killed his own students to survive and make it that far. Chaos erupted between the 2 factions. One student defended Hyejin while wielding an axe, protecting both himself and Hyejin. Members of the opposing side stayed alert, searching for an opening, while he threatened to kill them if they came closer. Ji looked toward the cube and saw Kareem silently mouthing her name. Kim filled with hope, believing that Mji would save her just as she had saved her from Minky before. However, Mji wanted Kim to escape using her own strength. She hated the weak and despised those who refused to resist. Whenever Mji saw someone being bullied or beaten in front of her, she imagined herself in their place. She hated that pain, and she hated the weak who forced her to relive it. No matter how many times she reached out to help, they never defended themselves. Deep down, she wished all the weak would die. Though the thought was honest, she could never turn her back on someone who was suffering. She had always hated that contradiction within herself, but could never overcome it. Ji counted 6 people surrounding Kim, and noticed that all of them carried swords or wore chain mail. She, on the other hand, was better equipped, with a shield, a long sword, and body armor. Even so, realizing she was outnumbered, she quickly scanned her surroundings to increase her chances of victory amid the chaos. At that moment, the golden transparent walls began to fade. Within seconds, the only protection around the items vanished. Hyuk was determined to kill 3 people to achieve his goal, but hesitated over whom to choose. Targeting the weakest would be the most efficient, but he refused to do it. He decided he would kill the first person who obtained an item and take it from them. Suddenly, a scream echoed throughout the gym. A student was pierced through the throat by a sharp spear, blood spraying as they desperately tried to push it away. They collapsed to the floor as the attacker slowly withdrew the spear from their neck. As it was pulled free, blood gushed violently from the deep wound, the veins having been severed. Due to the massive blood loss, the student tried to breathe through the wound, coughing violently as blood poured from their mouth as well. The man who stabbed them stood still, watching his victim struggle to breathe. Then he felt something behind him. A massive hammer made entirely of light, made of the same material that had trapped the dropouts, appeared directly behind him. The hammer swung with overwhelming speed and force, but its target was someone else. It instantly struck the dropout, crushing them and killing them on the spot, blood splattering everywhere. Everyone was left in shock, completely confused. Within seconds, the hammer began to fade and disintegrated into tiny particles of light. As it vanished, a pendant remained floating inside it. The man noticed it, and it now belonged to him. After killing an item bearer and obtaining the reward, he felt a brief surge of euphoria. He realized he had acquired an E-rank relic, something that would undoubtedly be useful. Suddenly the air rippled. Hyuk sprinted toward him at full speed, closing the distance from his blind spot in an instant. Then he leapt into the air. While the man examined the pendant with his spear in hand, Hyuk was already suspended midair, focused on his first opponent, and ready for his first hunt. He chose his Japanese katana. As he closed in on his prey, he swiftly drew the blade and unleashed a powerful slash. He attacked from behind, aiming for the man's head, but Hyuk felt a shock, as if his strike had been blocked by something. The opponent realized Hyuk had attempted to decapitate him from behind. However, Hyuk's katana shattered into pieces. He couldn't understand how or why it had happened. The impact hadn't bent the blade or split it cleanly. It had been pulverized by some form of protection. The opponent turned around, completely enraged. His eyes turned red, filled with murderous intent. Hyuk landed on the ground, holding the broken katana. As he tried to process what had just happened, his opponent lunged at him, attempting to pierce him with the spear. Hyuk realized it had to be some kind of protective enchantment granted by the pendant. The man thrust toward Hyuk's abdomen, but Hyuk threw the broken katana aside. It was useless now, and narrowly dodged the spear. The shattered katana hung briefly in the air. Hyuk's sharp reflexes allowed him to strike his opponent's face with precision. Yet as his fist passed through the man's face, he felt the same sensation again, as if something had blocked the blow. The katana was still falling. Hyuk was stunned that his attack had done no damage. Although the block emitted a burst of bright energy, it also obscured his opponent's vision for a moment. Even so, the man charged again and tried to stab Hyuk in the stomach. Hyuk dodged clumsily, losing balance and stability. Still, he managed to redirect the excess momentum and escape, putting some distance between himself and his opponent. The broken katana finally hit the ground blade first. As it spun, his hand slipped, and he cut himself. That brief distraction affected Hyuk mid-evasion. His opponent lunged at incredible speed, driving the spear's tip toward him. Hyuk kicked off the spear itself, launching into the air. The excessive force he used to twist away deflected the spear downward. Once Hyuk gained enough distance, he landed firmly on his feet, facing his opponent. Suddenly he felt something, a strange sensation coursing through his body. It was nothing like the dull fights he'd had with Miho and Han Song. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hyuk's attention shifted to the glowing pendant, wondering how long its effect would last. He instantly stepped out of the spear's range and threw another punch, fully focused and ferocious. The strike landed squarely on his opponent's face, but again, it caused no damage. An invisible force blocked it. However, after that hit, the pendant stopped glowing. Hyuk immediately understood what was happening. He read the situation and put his opponent in check. He moved swiftly to the side, slipped into the man's blind spot, and drew his thrusting sword. Before the opponent could react, he felt something wrong. He realized he had been stabbed in the neck from behind as blood began to pour from the wound. Hyuk held the estoc firmly while the man struggled to breathe. He pulled the blade free, causing even heavier bleeding, and blood began spilling from the man's mouth. The opponent slowly lost consciousness as his life drained away. He collapsed to the floor and died from massive blood loss. Like the previous victims, his body began to fade and crumble into ash. As it vanished, the pendant remained intact. Hyuk picked up the pendant. After killing his first target, he realized he still needed 2 more. The pendant turned out to be a protection necklace, an E-rank piece of equipment capable of intercepting attacks within a certain range, with up to 3 simultaneous interceptions, recharging every 20 minutes. The total number of students at the university was 1,938, but including professors, the population exceeded 2,000. Of them, only 812 had survived the Ring of Rebirth, and just 150 were participating in the bonus game. Dropouts were running throughout the gym, fighting for their lives. 2 participants cornered a dropout who was fleeing desperately. Suddenly, one of them rammed him with a spear, making him stumble and fall face first to the floor. His chin slammed against the ground. One attacker grabbed his hair and yanked his head back. They drew a knife and moved in to finish him as the victim trembled in terror. The blade touched his neck. Similar scenes were unfolding all across the gym. Many hunted individual targets, and those lucky enough to kill received rewards. One participant drew his sword and stepped toward Kim, ready to finish her as she trembled in fear. But in an instant, Kim vanished from his sight. Ji sprang into action, leaping in and escaping with Kim over her shoulders, leaving everyone stunned. Ji ran toward the opposite end of the gym, where another fight was underway. She headed toward Chu Yong-jin, who was trying to protect his girlfriend with an axe while she hid behind him. In the midst of the fight, someone shouted her name, startling everyone. It was Ji, carrying Kim on her back. She intervened immediately, kicking the attacker out of the fight and knocking him to the ground, forcing him to drop his sword. Ji landed as Yong-jin stood frozen in shock. The moment she punched the student in the throat as he approached Ly Hyen, Yong-jin's girlfriend, an alliance was formed. But Ji had other plans beyond saving Yong-jin and Hyejin. She called out to Baek Sero, another friend of Hyejin, and continued shouting specific names. Some looked away in fear, but others gradually began joining the fight. As her alliance aggressively took shape, the hunters began to be overwhelmed by Zhang Menji's group. Although this was only a bonus game and the E-rank item was tempting, many didn't want to risk their lives. Others, however, were willing to kill even when they didn't need to. As the chaos continued, some were suddenly struck by arrows from above, caught completely off guard. No one managed to block them, as if they had been fired by an extraordinarily skilled archer. The third-year representative, Kim Pil-young, along with his friend's son, Duke Pil, was willing to kill without risking his own life, using his sword to distinguish between acquaintances and strangers. Elsewhere, one of the dropouts tried to escape the gym, sprinting toward the exit. As he ran, he felt something behind him. Absolute terror seized his body, as if he were standing at the gates of hell. In an instant, he was decapitated by a female player moving at extreme speed, slicing through dropout necks one after another. She was none other than the third-year Queen Bee, Lee Huna. She was cruel in her own way, saving those with pretty faces while mercilessly killing anyone she deemed ugly. Those she spared were given swords and ordered to kill others. Elsewhere stood a man atop a professor's corpse, gripping an iron mace. 5 professors had died, 3 of whom were not dropouts but dropout hunters. One of them was the physical education teacher, Huang Mengji, who didn't hesitate for a second to kill his competitors. But there was another man whose mere presence struck fear into his enemies. Cho Jun challenged his opponents to move while they desperately searched for an opening. One fell to the ground, and Jun approached with a long sword in hand. As Jun advanced, another man silently slipped in from behind. He drew a knife and prepared to stab Cho Jun in the back. Desperate to survive and win the game, he seized the opportunity. In an instant, he lunged at Jun with immense speed and fury. But at that very moment, he felt something. He had entered a specific range. Cho Jun smiled. He had already detected him and was ready to counter. With brutal force, Jun swung his sword upward with a twisted grin, cleaving the attacker in half as the man dropped his weapon. Even in this seemingly simple game, there were countless styles and techniques. The players displayed unique methods, far removed from conventional combat. A sword clashed against a saber, sparks flying as the blades collided. Because Hyuk's rule was more eye-catching, he targeted anyone who obtained an item. But the moment their weapons clashed, he sensed something was wrong. His opponent's saber began cutting into his blade, clearly revealing the difference in sharpness. Hyuk quickly retreated to a safer position. Realizing the saber was an E-rank weapon, far superior to his F-rank bastard sword, Hyuk understood that a direct hit would likely split his blade in two. The opponent slashed toward his abdomen, but Hyuk dodged easily. The man tried to overwhelm him with relentless offense, but Hyuk evaded most attacks and blocked the rest. Hyuk waited for the perfect moment to counter. The instant his rival committed to an attack, Hyuk thrust straight into his chest. The wound was fatal, and the body immediately began dissolving into ash. Just as he had obtained the pendant, he now claimed the E-rank saber as well, clearly superior. However, Hyuk noticed something strange. This saber felt very different from his other weapons. His attention shifted to a nearby man who appeared to be adjusting his shoes. Suddenly, something caught Hyuk's eye. He dashed toward him, eager to test his new saber. He charged and tried to split the man in two, but the shoes granted their wearer a powerful jumping boost, allowing him to exert extraordinary force. Just as Hyuk was about to cut him, the man leapt over the attack. Hyuk noticed his opponent stayed airborne for an unnaturally long time, catching him off guard. He wasn't prepared for that evasion, or that ability. He lost momentum and fell to the ground. The other landed perfectly and sprang away again like a coiled spring. Using his boots, the man escaped Hyuk, leaping across the gym and dodging everyone in his path. Confused, Hyuk wondered if the effect came from the shoes, and whether killing him would be difficult. He blended into the crowd and vanished in an instant, using people as cover to break his opponent's line of sight. While airborne, the man scanned the area, searching for Hyuk, but couldn't find him. He even checked the opposite side, trying to locate his predator. Failing to spot him, he assumed Hyuk had given up the chase and switched targets. Though he felt a brief sense of relief, he also knew it wasn't time to let his guard down. Then he spotted Hyuk, blending in with the crowd and rapidly moving toward the landing point. He realized there was no escape. Trapped in midair, where dodging is impossible, panic set in. And he was right. You can't evade while airborne. Hyuk's S-stock pierced straight through him, blood spraying everywhere. In that instant, he died, while Hyuk stood firmly on the ground. Everyone was left terrified and shaken by the scene, especially the students who had been watching from what they thought was a safe distance, now trembling before Hyuk's murderous resolve. Exhausted after the chase, Hyuk panted as he regulated his breathing. He sat down on a nearby chair to recover his strength. As he rested, he noticed something. People were growing cautious around him. Hyuk was killing actively to achieve his goals. Even though Kim Pil-young and Manji had killed more people than him, Hyuk was the one receiving the most hostility. No one doubted that Cho Jun, the strongest fighter in the entire school, would kill without mercy. But Hyuk had gone even further, doing things even Cho Jun wouldn't do. That bred resentment and hostility toward Hyuk. Still, even surrounded by ill intent, he detected a white-haired person through his innate ability. That person even gave him a friendly gesture. Hyuk was startled and immediately ignored him, feeling uneasy at the lack of hostility, despite the fact that the man had also killed. As the round neared its end, the only dropouts who survived were the 4 protected by Minji. The rest either died or killed someone with help from their allies, removing the object mark. Given how difficult it was to confront Minji's 15-person group, the hunt ended there. Moments later, however, the announcement for the next game appeared, confusing and unsettling everyone. A red message flashed. The throne game has begun. A golden light emerged at the center of the stage. The rules of the throne game appeared in yellow text, along with all its specifications. According to the rules, many people could gain the support of 5 individuals within the same school. A typical friend group usually consisted of 3 to 5 people, often centered around a key figure. More people were trying to gather 5 followers than anyone had expected. The reward was 10 karma points. Normally, killing a person granted a total of 7 karma points distributed among stats. However, since karma points could be freely allocated, this reward could be even more valuable than killing 4 or 5 people. Sun Dukpo received a golden message asking whether he wished to support Kim Pil-young as king for this round. Dukpo looked at Pil-young, who met his gaze and nodded, clearly signaling that a sinister plan was already in place. Even Minji considered choosing 5 people, but not those who already trusted and followed her. Nor did she consider easily controlled people like Karim. A yellow message appeared before everyone, asking whether they wished to support Minji. She thought of leaders, experienced people and close friends, and then spoke aloud. She questioned whether there would be infinite thrones and proposed unity as the true source of strength. Her words made people hesitate and reflect. She explained that the number of thrones was limited, and those who declared themselves kings would eventually have to fight each other in a battle royale. Since she spoke immediately after the message appeared, many demanded guarantees. Rationally, Minji was only 50% certain, but emotionally, she was completely convinced. People sensed her determination and confidence. Trusting her, they all chose to support her, believing making her queen would benefit them. A golden orb materialized in the gymnasium. Minji's body began to glow as golden energy spiraled around her. Golden lights shone across the gym, marking each king's location. Out of 797 survivors of the bonus game, 42 became kings. Another set of rules appeared, the last being a hidden rule. Everything aligned perfectly for Hyuk, who had killed 3 people. It was the ideal moment to execute his plan involving hidden rule number 9 and rule number 15, giving him a decisive advantage. Before the throne game officially began, 5 minutes were granted to choose a king. Those who failed to do so would cease to exist. Hyuk leaned against the wall, resting and conserving energy. Meanwhile, Chu Young-jin spoke with Minji about recruiting Hyuk. After considering all possibilities, Minji approached Hyuk directly and asked him to join her faction. Hyuk reflected on everything Minji had done for him. However, due to the hidden rules he had discovered, he knew he had to follow his own path to win. He explained that circumstances prevented him from joining her faction. Even so, after witnessing his overwhelming power and agility, Minji had no desire to make him an enemy. Out of curiosity, she asked which faction he would join. Hyuk dodged the question, assuring her he wouldn't be her enemy as long as circumstances allowed. Minji fell silent, processing his words. Then she extended her hand. Hyuk sensed goodwill in the gesture. No hostility, no malice. Only a desire to have him on her side. Understanding her intentions, Hyuk accepted the handshake, sealing a peaceful relationship between them. While Choi Hyuk stood still, a black silhouette appeared in front of him, catching his attention. Cho Jun introduced himself with a casual gesture, but Hyuk immediately sensed that something was wrong. Keeping his distance, Hyuk gently pushed him away, making Jun think that Hyuk was being rude. After observing Hyuk's performance, Jun realized that he was a formidable fighter and wanted to fight alongside him. Believing it was mandatory to join someone, Hyuk refused. Through his innate ability, the eyes of distinction, he had perceived something disturbing. Jun's eyes were stained red, indicating harmful and murderous intent. Jun smiled as if he already knew what was going on. He assumed that Hyuk had joined Young Minji's faction and decided to leave. Even so, Hyuk noticed that a red aura was emanating from Jun, strangely mixed with goodwill. Confused, he wondered how someone could harbor murderous intent and positive feelings at the same time, and whether that meant Jun would try to kill him if he couldn't recruit him. Jun walked away while Hyuk continued watching him, convinced that he was a peculiar man who believed he could intimidate him. Almost 5 minutes had passed. While everyone gathered around the 42 kings, Choi Hyuk remained alone, rejecting every alliance offer. Some even believed that he must be backed by someone extremely powerful to act independently. When the timer reached 0, a golden light illuminated the area. It was hidden rule number 9 of the throne game, the one Hyuk had discovered before the extra game. Just like with the other 42 kings, the rule began to disintegrate and rotate around his body, as if being absorbed. What no one knew was that, unlike the other rules, which had multiple copies, the rule of the king without subjects existed as a single copy. Everyone was left too stunned to speak. Although Hyuk's ascension as the king without subjects was unexpected, everyone understood that the extra 30 karma points would create an overwhelming gap from the very start, making it increasingly difficult to catch up to him. Another set of throne game rules was then revealed. Only 5 thrones could exist, and no one would be allowed to leave until only 5 kings remained. It was also stated that the only way to eliminate a king was to kill them without hesitation. Most importantly, if a king died, all of their followers would automatically switch allegiance to the enemy king. This rule caused armies to grow exponentially. After reading all these rules, many of those who had hastily become kings began to regret their decision. It felt as though they had willingly thrown themselves into a deadly game with no escape. However, like two sides of the same coin, there were also kings burning with ambition to claim one of the 5 thrones. At the same time, intense killing intent focused on Choi Hyuk. Individually, he was the strongest, yet he lacked numbers. Having allies would have benefited him greatly and given him an additional advantage. Through his eyes of distinction, Hyuk could clearly see that killing intent, as the eyes of most kings turned red. However, Hyuk began to laugh ominously. He drew his sword, and as he pointed it forward, his saber transformed into a fawn-shaped serrated blade. He aimed the fawn saber at Kim Pil-young, the master archer, then at Cho Jun, the best martial artist in the entire school, next at Manji, the iron mace-wielding tank, and finally, he pointed it at all the kings present. With an unsettling, sinister smile, Choi Hyuk declared that he would kill every last one of them. A chill ran down the spines of those who heard his words. However, he never mentioned or threatened young Minji even once. Because of that, she remained silent, carefully observing the situation. Having received 40 free karma points, Hyuk distributed them as follows. He invested mainly in endurance and recovery, assigned 5 points each to strength and speed, 10 points to recovery, and 8 points to retribution. Even so, not even he knew how many people he would end up killing throughout the entire game. The permanent stat increases provided by items were displayed clearly. If an enhancement was removed, the base value would decrease according to the previously shown number. In addition, Hyuk had obtained 3 items during the extra game: an E-rank protection necklace, capable of intercepting an enemy attack within a certain range; E-rank tireless boots, allowing the wearer to run faster and jump higher; an E-rank fang saber, with a durability of 300. Each king possessed their own emblem: Jiang Mini, the Mad Knight King; Cho Jun, the King of Slaughter; Kim Pil-young, the Hunter King; and Choi Hyuk, the King without subjects. There were now 43 kings, including the King without subjects, and only 5 thrones existed. Each group began to distance itself from the others. In an instant, Hyuk leaped over everyone as they tried to decipher his intentions. Pil-young went on alert the moment he noticed Hyuk's movement. Hyuk jumped toward him just as Pil-young ordered his shield-bearers to advance to the front and his spearmen to position themselves behind, forming an effective defensive formation for both blocking and counterattacking. He also instructed the rest to retreat against the wall for cover. Annoyed at being attacked as soon as the round began, Pil-young drew his bow and aimed at Hyuk. Hyuk charged straight toward him, creating a direct confrontation between the two kings. However, instead of attacking, he landed beside him and continued running forward. Pil-young was stunned. Looking back, he realized that Hyuk had never intended to attack him. His true target was the weakest of the 6 kings he had pointed at, whose symbol was a dodo. Hyuk didn't know his name, but he knew the man was close to Lee Minki, Hyunung, and others who had bullied him in the past. The targeted king raised his weapon in terror, but it was useless. Hyuk leapt onto him and delivered a clean slash across his forehead. The king froze, unable to move. Only a few seconds later did he realize that the blood flowing from his forehead was the sign of his death. The system notified Hyuk that he was the first player to kill a king, granting him 3 additional karma points and increasing his retribution by 3 points. Upon landing after his first kill, the system also informed him that he had received 2 extra points for killing a king in general. When the message disappeared, Hyuk realized that he had eliminated 1 target and that 5 more remained. Normally, followers who lost their king would automatically serve the enemy king. However, Hyuk was the king without subjects. The followers left without a king were quickly approached by other kings and ended up joining whoever reached them first. Thus, every time Hyuk killed a king, the battlefield filled with ownerless followers. This triggered total chaos, with all kings rushing to recruit more followers. In a game where death was inevitable without sufficient power, the true competition between kings had finally begun. Psychological warfare quickly escalated into open war. Heads fell one after another in the brutal melee. Meanwhile, Hyuk calmly severed another combatant's wrist. Unable to defend himself, the man was left helpless, and Hyuk stabbed him straight through the neck. Seeing their comrade die, other followers of the same king charged at Hyuk. However, he dodged one attack while simultaneously blocking another. With a single slash, he killed both attackers, brutally decapitating one of them. Looking around, he saw blood splattered everywhere. When the battle turned into a true battle royale, the king Hyuk had been pursuing screamed for him to stop, begging in terror. However, he forgot that his followers could not disobey his orders and mistakenly forced them to remain still. This allowed Hyuk to easily break through his defenses as the king tried to flee. To the king's horror, a soldier from an enemy king attacked him head-on while he wasn't looking. A single strike was enough to stop him. The man smiled, believing he had won. However, young Minji, who had been watching everything, attacked him from behind with a swift slash. Blood burst from the wound as Minji stared forward with determination. She then turned to her friend, who was trembling in fear, and ordered her to kill the man she had just wounded. Her friend hesitated. Minji shouted at her to stop whining and do it, calling her trash. With tears in her eyes, the girl finally made up her mind and drove the blade into the wounded man's neck, killing him. After his death, the item icon floating above his head slowly disappeared. Minji was satisfied, though she wished she could have done the same to Lee Hyunjin. Even so, she decided to wait cautiously. The number of surviving kings had decreased, creating more space on the battlefield and making movement easier to control. Due to the chaotic battle initiated by Choi Hyuk, everyone's stamina was at its limit. After pushing their bodies beyond their capacity, they could barely move, as if suffering from extreme muscle pain. If Yoon Karin were to die in that state, she would be nothing more than a fool. At that moment, something caught Minji's attention out of the corner of her eye. She turned, and horrified saw that the upper half of Kim Pil-young's body had been severed at the waist. Pil-young's face was frozen in absolute shock, as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. And it wasn't just him. Everyone stared in disbelief. Kim Pil-young, the student council president, had finally died, and it was Choi Hyuk who killed him. Minji was left completely speechless, unable to understand how Hyuk had managed to do something like that on his own. At the same time, Cho Jun stared ahead with regret, lamenting that he hadn't surrounded and attacked another group earlier. Fixing his gaze on Hyuk, he asked fearfully whether Hyuk had really killed Pil-young by himself. Hyuk returned the stare with murderous eyes. Looking straight through Cho Jun's followers, he regarded him with palpable bloodlust. With a deadly smile, he suddenly leapt forward, attempting to decapitate Cho Jun. Jun reacted just in time, blocking the strike at the last instant. Even so, his hands began to tremble from the impact. He realized it was pure brute force from Hyuk, without even using a special technique. Jun had explored the entire gym and found a skill that allowed him to attack at incredible speed regardless of the weapon used. Yet Hyuk's simple blade already seemed to rival that ability. With another slash, Hyuk's sword clashed against Jun's. Unable to block it completely, Jun activated his skill, but he was still pushed back as his stamina drained rapidly. If he used the skill one more time, he wouldn't even have the energy to flee. Realizing this, he ordered all his followers to block Hyuk's path. While Hyuk tried to force his way through by cutting down Jun's followers, Jun fled with all his strength. After killing many of Jun's subordinates, Hyuk decided to pause for a moment and let out a deep breath. He reflected on how close he had come to killing another king. It had been perfect when he killed Pil-young by catching him off guard. Pil-young failed to block because he underestimated the defensive item Hyuk carried. It would have been ideal to take Jun as well, but in truth, Hyuk hadn't been fighting with genuine killing intent. He had been training, testing how far his body could move and how much he could extend his arms and legs. In response to Choi Hyuk's ability and talent, the stock blade evolved into an E-rank predator sword. Only 17 kings remained alive, and of his 6 specific targets, just 2 were left. Hyuk looked at his next target with a smile and said they should continue. He took a deep breath and readied himself. With a powerful push off the ground, he launched forward. Seeing that he still had the will to fight, everyone else was stunned, wondering how much stamina he had left. The truth was that Hyuk's stamina stood at an astonishing 83 points. His next target, Hwang Manji, swung his mace and smashed it into the ground. Hyuk swiftly dodged the blow, circled around Hwang, and slashed, tearing his shirt. Both stepped back to steady themselves, but while Hyuk smiled, Hwang trembled in fear. Hwang immediately ordered his followers to block Hyuk. Though frowning grimly, they had no choice but to obey. Hyuk glanced at an attacker wielding an axe and without blinking, split his head in two. With a rapid flurry of strikes, he quickly eliminated the rest of the enemies around him. While Hyuk dealt with the followers, King Hwang tried killing others to gain more points. He had decided he needed to end the game quickly if he wanted to survive. With a single swing of his mace, he sent 3 people flying. Clenching his weapon, he reminded himself that he had to be among the final 5 kings. The moment Choi Hyuk charged toward Hwang Manji, the fate of the other kings was sealed. The battle dragged on, and blood continued to spill. Suddenly, in one area of the battlefield, a burst of purple flashes appeared. They were the strikes of Li Huna, the assassin queen, swift and silent. However, her stamina was still a problem. When she ran out, Jun seized the opportunity and hurled an axe at her. The blow pierced her shoulder and sank deep into her flesh. As she fell helplessly, June rushed toward her. He advanced his sword while offering a false apology. With a swift motion, he pulled the blade free as blood gushed from the wound. She lay dead at his feet, and June thought the axe was far too good to discard. Even so, he knew he couldn't kill Hyuk with it, and needed a better item. Thinking that, he turned his gaze toward Lee Hyojin, who was being protected by Chu Young-jin. They had grown up together and fallen in love long ago. To Young-jin, Hyojin was his other half. Seeing her terrified face, he asked if she was okay. She tried to smile and nodded, but just as he embraced her, an axe flew from behind. Before Young-jin could even realize what had happened, he felt his hands soaked in blood. Looking down, he saw an axe embedded in Hyojin's head. She had died from the fatal blow. The system brought down the yellow hammer on her, just as it had for all those with an item title. Before Young-jin's eyes, her body disintegrated as blood splattered everywhere. All that remained was a dark red sword. June lunged forward to claim the final item and picked up the sword with delight. At that very moment, Young-jin's eyes turned blood-red as his unique ability awakened, Furious Warrior. Consumed by uncontrollable rage, he charged at the relaxed June, axe in hand. June underestimated him and casually raised his new sword to strike. Minji saw the reckless assault and tried to stop Young-jin, but he was deaf to reason as he prepared a devastating blow. June's slash failed to penetrate deeply, slowed at the last moment by a mysterious golden shield. Young-jin's axe struck true, carving a fatal gash into the center of June's head. At the same time, Hyuk managed to stab Hwang Manji in the neck. In an instant, two kings lost their lives simultaneously. Both collapsed to the ground, bleeding from their wounds, and vanished upon death. When it was over, Young-jin fell to his knees, tears filling his eyes as he mourned his beloved, clutching the sword she had left behind. Hyuk looked at him with compassion. He scanned his surroundings and wondered if this was the end. About 30 minutes had passed to eliminate 26 of the 43 kings. However, it took only 5 minutes to eliminate 13 of the remaining 17. In the end, only 4 kings remained: the crazy Night King Young Minji, the Provocation King Kim Hunbaek, the Slave King Song Seaman, and the King without subjects Choi Hyuk. The long and brutal battle had finally ended, and out of 797 survivors, only 483 remained alive. The system announced that it was time to rest, allowing both kings and their subjects to move freely, though they could not leave the school until nightfall. In the cafeteria, a whiteboard displayed the list of available dishes. There, the various kings and their followers gathered to eat. Hunbaek asked Minji with concern why everyone was being served together. He suggested dividing the supplies fairly and letting each group decide how to distribute them. After reaching an agreement, he announced that everyone could eat as much as they wanted, since the food would be shared among all. As the meals were handed out, Kim Hunbaek thought to himself that he had gained a political advantage over Minji, and decided she was nothing more than an idiot incapable of using power properly. A malicious smile spread across his face as a sense of impending trouble loomed over Minji and the others. The road ahead for Choi Hyuk would be anything but easy. Anxiety spread as the surviving students discussed how they had killed other people, wondering if the same thing would happen again the next day. Some searched for their friends, hoping they were still alive, while others sat on the floor trembling in fear, and some cried over their losses. Meanwhile, a student sat alone in silence inside a classroom. He stared outside when something caught his attention. The barrier surrounding the school seemed to be disappearing. His eyes widened in shock. He jumped to his feet and shouted that the wall was gone. As soon as the others heard the cry, they began running toward the school's exit. However, there was a message that only the kings had received, stating that all troops were to remain on standby until the next morning. Hyuk felt a sharp headache as he wondered what the system was planning now. Minji stepped forward, trying to stop everyone. She told them that only the kings had received a message instructing them to wait until morning. She also mentioned that anyone who went outside would die. Hyuk felt slightly confused, since she had mentioned death, but he didn't recall that being in the message. The others began talking among themselves in confusion. 2 girls questioned Minji, asking why only the kings had received the message and doubting its legitimacy. Just then, Song Seaman spoke up, saying that he had also received the message. Kim Hunbaek stepped forward and said the same, but clarified that the message only stated they had to remain in place until morning. With a sly look, he added that the part about dying was a lie. Minji narrowed her eyes as she found herself cornered. Everyone looked at one another, confused, unsure of whom to trust. They asked whether the message really said nothing about dying. Young Minji firmly stated that it did mention death, and questioned Kim Hunbaek about lying. A bewildered Hunbaek asked why he would lie. Chu Young-jin stepped in, saying that he had also received the message and that it did indeed include the word death. All eyes turned toward Kim Hunbaek, filled with doubt. He looked frustrated. Young Minji told everyone to return to the school. Kim Hunbaek shouted that it was easy to make someone look like a fool. Then Young Minji called Choi Hyuk and asked him to gather all the kings, saying she wanted to discuss their current situation. They gathered in a classroom. Young Minji said there were two things that had caught her attention. The first was the words written on the ring of rebirth. She asked why it didn't say, "Will you live?" but instead, "Will you kill?" Today's message had referred to them as troops. Young Minji said that whoever was behind this was trying to turn them into an army. The ring of rebirth was meant for individuals, a system designed to test their talent for killing. Later, they were forced to fight in groups and choose leaders in the game of the throne. He wondered what kind of enemy they would eventually have to face as an army. Kim Hunbaek pulled a bottle of alcohol from his backpack and took a long swig, clearly frustrated. Young Minji kept calling him Kim Hunbaek, without using terms like friend or superior. Annoyed, Young Minji told him to stop irritating everyone with his drunken behavior, since people were already on edge. She advised him to go outside, stop drinking, and get some sleep. Kim Hunbaek flipped them off and walked out of the classroom. The meeting ended with an agreement to reconvene once they had more information. Choi Hyuk looked down at the table and checked his stats. There was a star next to his stamina, indicating it had surpassed 100 points. It wasn't just a numerical increase. It was a qualitative change in karma. He had received the evaluation of a sovereign. He thought about how this matched what Young Minji had said. Maybe they really were trying to form an army. He reflected that the Predator's sword had no special abilities or karma and was ugly as hell, but it did its job well. It was sharp and durable. Suddenly, he remembered the tear-streaked face of a woman being strangled to death. It was a nightmare. He tried to clear his mind, but he couldn't change the past, and that filled him with rage. Did this mean he had to become a murderer? Or a mindless killing machine, abandoning his old principles? He decided he needed clear rules about who to kill and who to spare. First, he evaluated Young Minji. He calmed himself and chose to take things slowly. The bottle of alcohol fell to the floor, spilling its contents. Young Minji walked through the liquid. She was seen killing the drunken men. Terrified, Kim Hunbaek backed away until he was pressed against the classroom blackboard. He begged Young Minji to spare him and apologized repeatedly. Young Minji drew her blood-soaked sword as Kim Hunbaek stared at her in horror, and she killed him. The next morning, Young Minji called for a meeting and announced that Kim Hunbaek and the 6 executives of the Heckler Group had died the night before. She explained that while intoxicated, they had harassed a female student and committed perverse acts. She added that they ignored a restraining order and launched a preemptive attack, which led to the deaths of all 7. She told everyone she regretted that the situation couldn't be resolved peacefully. The members exchanged uneasy looks. One of them raised his hand and asked if it had really been necessary to kill them. She answered that there had been no other choice. Then a system message appeared, announcing that the 24 people who had not returned by morning were dead. Choi Hyuk thought to himself that, just as expected, Young Minji's assumption had been correct. Another message appeared, announcing that the entire Gangdong district had become a war zone. The next announcement stated that on day 30, the locations of the escape codes would be revealed, and only troops that possessed them would be able to escape. Another message followed, stating that the locations of survival supply areas would also be revealed. Those who saw the messages looked at one another in confusion. Why were they talking about survival? Did this mean they would have to fight other people for supplies? Choi Hyuk was shocked by the absurd and cruel nature of the rule. Young Minji and Song Sumin formed an alliance to go to Damart, a supply location. Choi Hyuk asked if he could stop by his house first, surprising both Young Minji and Song Sumin. The outer city was already in chaos, and no one knew what conditions were like outside. Young Minji said that crossing the city would be practically suicidal and asked Choi Hyuk if he would be okay on his own. With absolute determination, Choi Hyuk said he would be fine. Young Minji agreed, though with visible doubt. Choi Hyuk left the school. When he looked outside, he was met with a horrifying scene and wondered what the hell had happened. Buildings were burning, hospitals were in flames. In a single day, the city had been reduced to ruins. Choi Hyuk arrived home. He entered the kitchen and saw that the dishes hadn't been washed. That made him wonder if his mother hadn't returned yet. Anxiety and fear tightened his chest. He left the apartment, unsure whether what he felt was despair or impending doom. He opened the door and saw nothing out of the ordinary. He stepped outside, but suddenly felt a chill. Looking around, he sensed that something was wrong. People from nearby apartments were watching him from below, peeking through their curtains. One man frantically waved his hands, signaling for him to leave, desperately trying to warn him. Choi Hyuk looked at him, confused. The man kept gesturing and whispering for him to go, saying it was dangerous. Suddenly, something emerged behind Choi Hyuk. A gray monster with massive arms burst out of the ground, shattering the asphalt. The man who had tried to warn him was now drenched in sweat. He screamed for Choi Hyuk to run as the monster's eye opened and locked onto him. It was a quadrupedal creature with small horns, red eyes, and gray skin. Drool dripped from its mouth as it faced Choi Hyuk. Nervous, Choi Hyuk drew his weapon. Determined to fight, he charged forward, holding his sword back to build momentum. The monster raised one of its front limbs, spreading its clawed fingers, ready to crush him. Choi Hyuk stopped, changed direction, dodged the attack, and countered by slicing one of the monster's hind legs. Purple blood burst from the wound. Some of the blood splashed onto Choi Hyuk. His uniform began to dissolve, and the ground beneath it started melting as well. He realized the blood was mildly acidic, but fortunately his stamina was high enough to protect his skin. The monster opened its jaws and let out a deafening, disturbing screech. The sound visibly irritated and disoriented Choi Hyuk. Taking advantage of that moment, the creature hurled a car at him. Choi Hyuk barely dodged, but the monster immediately lunged forward. Unable to evade, Choi Hyuk was struck and sent flying. He bounced off a car and slammed into a nearby building, shattering the wall. The monster advanced toward the fallen Choi Hyuk and screeched again. Windows shattered, and Choi Hyuk writhed in pain. He drew his serrated sword and leapt at the monster, which raised its limb again to counterattack. Choi Hyuk dodged and slipped beneath the creature. He landed a clean strike near its torso, making the monster howl in pain as it bled once more. Enraged, the monster retaliated violently. Its front limbs slammed down, striking Choi Hyuk's legs and preventing him from dodging the next attack. Choi Hyuk collapsed, the asphalt beneath him crumbling into debris. He looked up. The monster leapt toward him, both claws raised for the killing blow. But when its legs slammed into the ground, Choi Hyuk was no longer there. The man who had warned him watched from his balcony, completely stunned. He remembered the strange messages he had seen the night before, but had ignored them, thinking he was just tired. He wondered why his television wouldn't turn on. He had read a book and gone to sleep. Now he regretted it. If he had gone outside, maybe it wouldn't have been too late. He had woken up thinking it was an earthquake, but it was actually the monster Choi Hyuk was fighting, crushing people under its claws and flipping cars. All he could do was watch from the balcony, paralyzed with fear. He saw Choi Hyuk dodge the attack and thought there was still a survivor, and an incredibly strong one at that. He wondered if Choi Hyuk was still human, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was which side he was fighting on. Seeing him battle the monster, he knew Choi Hyuk was clearly on their side. The observer trembled, fearing for Choi Hyuk's life. The monster slammed its claws into the ground, but at that moment Choi Hyuk's blade pierced its palm, tearing through its arm. The monster screamed in agony. With eyes full of determination, Choi Hyuk leapt into the air and, with a single slash, severed the monster's neck. The head hit the ground with a dull thud. Choi Hyuk called out to the observer, telling him to come down. The man, still on the balcony, couldn't believe he had survived. The monster's head lay motionless on the ground. Choi Hyuk assured him it was dead and that there was nothing to fear. People began gathering in the parking lot around Choi Hyuk. They talked about a ring. The old man said he knew nothing about any ring, only that strange words had appeared, and nothing else had happened. The observer added that once night fell, the attacks began, like the one Choi Hyuk had just faced. A woman said she had briefly seen another monster, as large as an apartment building. She claimed she couldn't see it clearly in the darkness, but it looked like a dinosaur. The others argued that they hadn't seen anything like that, but she swore it was real. Choi Hyuk wondered if a monster the size of a building truly existed. He looked at the apartments, and calculated how many strikes it would take to kill something that large. He told the 3 residents he was heading to Hinyeong High School. The old man said he would stay behind, not wanting to be a burden. The other 2 decided to accompany Choi Hyuk to the school. They imagined the school as a refuge, but in reality, it had become a war zone. It held many necessities, food, weapons, and a weak barrier. As long as the barrier remained active, monsters entering the school grounds had their abilities reduced to half their original power. Without that barrier, Given the current state of people who had just received karma, they would have been wiped out in the very first attack. Two of the same monsters Choi Hyuk had fought earlier approached the school's main gates. People panicked, running for safety and trying to shut the doors. One of the monsters leapt at the windows, shattering the glass. Screams and terror filled the classrooms. Men, women, and children were being attacked, unable to do anything. Students equipped with armor and weapons rushed to the front lines to fight. Until then, the monsters had never directly assaulted the front line. Dong Soo-hyung, wearing his armor, arrived at a classroom, only to find it drenched in blood. That night, Dong Soo-hyung and his allies called for a meeting. They said they could not allow the monsters to cross the barrier, or everyone would die. There was only one option left: prevent the monsters from retreating. They were seen outside the school gate, waiting to ambush the two monsters roaming inside. Dong Soo-hyung and his allies hid behind bushes, waiting for the perfect moment. Then they attacked all at once, catching the monsters off guard. The two monsters counterattacked. Some people were caught between their jaws. Dong Soo-hyung charged straight at one of them, shouting, "I won't let you through!" He managed to drive his sword into the top of one monster's head. Suddenly, an ally screamed for him to be careful. He turned and saw the other monster rushing toward him with its jaws wide open, about to bite him, while his sword was still lodged in the first monster's skull. Terrified, he wondered if this was how he was going to die, staring straight into the mouth of the monster charging at him. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Then, suddenly, the monster's head split in two. Dong Soo-hyung opened his eyes in shock and relief. Standing in front of him was Choi Hyuk, who had decapitated the monster in a single slash to save him. Dong Soo-hyung lay on the ground, while Choi Hyuk stood before him. Their eyes met. Unable to hide his surprise, Dong Soo-hyung asked who he was, but Choi Hyuk walked past without answering. Choi Hyuk thought that if his stamina was proportional to his strength and speed, he could only fight at full power for about 5 minutes. That meant stamina consumption hadn't changed much from before. However, Ho-jun was completely out of breath after using just one lightning attack. Choi Hyuk wondered why that was. If he used his control stat to fully dominate his body, even for a single strike, could he generate such overwhelming force that his body would temporarily be unable to use karma? Choi Hyuk attacked another monster, ripping its mouth apart with a slash. At that moment, there were still 37 monsters inside the school grounds. However, the formation of Dong Soo-hyung's suicide squad was on the verge of collapse. Even with shields and swords, the members trembled in fear when facing two monsters at once. Choi Hyuk leapt from behind the group and charged at the monsters. He drove his sword into one monster's skull and continued the motion, splitting it cleanly in two and killing it instantly. At the same time, another student wielding a crowbar was being attacked by a monster, desperately trying to keep its jaws from closing. Choi Hyuk advanced, cutting down every monster that stood in his way. The savage creatures froze in shock when they saw their leader split in half. After killing 3 monsters with a single sweep and injuring 4 more, Choi Hyuk was already deep in the enemy's rear lines. He had charged straight through, and ended up behind them. Only one monster remained in front of him. He exhaled deeply and swung his arm. The monster cowered pitifully, but the blade didn't strike it. Instead, he used the momentum to twist his body. His foot slammed down on the monster's forehead, and he sprang into the air. Rather than finishing it with his sword, he used the monster as a springboard and crushed it. After that, the monsters began to retreat, trying to flee. The students who had surrounded them cut them down one by one. The hunched monsters, which had once relied on charging tactics against humans, were now being defeated by the very same tactics. Choi Hyuk noticed that his recovery was far too slow. He realized that the penalty for using power beyond his strength and speed stats didn't just affect stamina consumption. It also reduced stamina recovery. Dong Soo-hyung thanked Choi Hyuk for protecting the fortress and saving their lives, and granted him a right to request items. When scrolls were used on the monsters' corpses, a golden hammer appeared, smashing the body and leaving behind an item as a reward. At Shinmyeong High School, they used a large number of these scrolls, turning all 46 defeated monsters into items. Golden hammers falling everywhere made for a spectacular sight. Kang Dong-soo offered Choi Hyuk the right to choose 8 items from the 46. This decision was made after a discussion between Kang Dong-soo and the other 7 leaders of the Shinmyeong fortress. Some argued that since they used their own scrolls, they should charge a commission and limit the reward to 5 items. Others said it would be disgraceful to be stingy after such a dangerous situation and suggested offering 10. Someone else claimed it was enough to give him the 8 monsters he personally killed. However, Choi Hyuk didn't feel the need to be greedy. He didn't need to be. 8 E-rank items were enough. If he took more, he wouldn't be able to use them all, and they would only become a burden. First, he chose armor made from the parts of the hunched monsters. When he had first faced one, he had regretted not taking armor from the school. He also selected an E-rank lightning sword, similar to the one he had used before. Next, he picked 3 recovery potions and a utility bag capable of storing many items. His mood improved when he placed a chest containing 6 more potions inside the bag. He worried that the day's battle had pushed his body too far, but with those potions, he could fight even harder. Kang Dong-soo watched Choi Hyuk's bag with visible regret over the loss of the potions. However, he quickly changed his expression and energetically asked if Choi Hyuk planned to stay there. Kang Dong-soo was surprised. Outside, with the barrier weakening, hell would be even worse than here. He couldn't understand why someone so young would want to go out there alone. Choi Hyuk thought this wasn't a game where you could lock yourself away, survive, and escape. That was the key. Each of his stats that exceeded 100 points had a star next to it. He wondered if another star would appear after surpassing another 100 points. It wasn't a quantitative change, it was qualitative. He lay back on a bed, still wondering what would happen if he invested more karma points into stats enhanced by items. Then memories flooded his mind. A red-haired person sitting on the ground, demanding that someone repeat what they had said, their face twisted with rage. Smoking, he hurled insults at someone for disrespecting him, and then beat them to death. 2 witnesses asked if he had just killed someone, but the young man immediately threatened them. He asked what it had to do with them, accusing them of using vulgar language and disrespecting him. Enraged, the elders grabbed him by the collar and beat him. When he fought back, more people joined in. The young man begged, his face bloodied and tear-stained, insisting it wasn't him, while someone stomped on his face. Teachers and parents intervened, trying to stop the crowd that had already lost all reason. Countless students were destroyed. After that, whenever students saw an adult, they lowered their heads. Irrational violence became etched into reality. Fear and taboos were born. Similar incidents occurred in every group, sometimes against selfish people who refused to fight monsters. Sometimes against a daycare director who abandoned children and fled alone, sometimes against foreign workers. People realized that being alone in this place meant death, and that even if it was flawed, authority was necessary. Only by supporting a chosen authority could safety be guaranteed. Fear and taboos created order. Ranks were quickly assigned, and depending on who gained power, and how they gained it, each group developed vastly different traits. It was like an era of civil wars. People gathered in assembly zones, busy establishing order. Young Minji's group, which had begun with a massive brawl rather than a meeting zone, did everything it could to secure early supplies and a base. Dong Su-hyung told Choi Hyuk that Shinmyeong High School wasn't the only assembly zone. There were others, such as Dongjin Hospital and Hunha Shopping Mall. Rumors said those places were also functioning as gathering points. Dong Su-hyung told Choi Hyuk that he believed he had seen the monster's lair. Choi Hyuk asked where it was, and Dong Su-hyung replied that it was in the ecological park. He added that a dark hole had appeared in the air there, from which monsters had emerged. They weren't crooks. These had 2 legs and sharp arms. They were humanoid, but clearly different. When Choi Hyuk arrived at the ecological park, a fierce battle was already underway. A young man wielding a sword and shield was fighting the monsters alone. Though his movements were clumsy, he fought surprisingly well. As if he knew in advance where the monsters would strike, he steadily took them down, even while stumbling. He decapitated monsters with remarkable efficiency. When the creature's massive blades came crashing down, the young man did everything he could to deflect them with his shield. Because of the size of their weapons, the attacks left huge openings, which he exploited by lunging forward and stabbing them. Choi Hyuk observed that the young man was strangely skilled in combat. His abilities were impressive. However, the boy was completely exhausted and suddenly shouted for help. Choi Hyuk was startled at that moment. Without revealing his presence, Choi Hyuk positioned himself behind the young man. Even so, the boy sensed him without looking back. Answering his call, Choi Hyuk drew his sword and charged forward. Choi Hyuk moved 1 step faster than the bladed monster's weapons. After instantly killing 5, the blade monster at the rear rose to face him. It had 2 legs and 4 blades instead of arms. It let out a hideous scream and lunged at Choi Hyuk with its blades spread wide. Choi Hyuk instinctively dodged the first slash. He couldn't even see the blade. He barely avoided the second and third. Its physical abilities were overwhelming, strong enough to easily tear through 10 crooks. Its strength and speed far surpassed Choi Hyuk's. The continuous assault of its 4 blades was like a saw with no dead angles. Choi Hyuk did everything he could to evade, completely on the defensive. One strike clipped his arm and sent him flying into a wooden bridge. The monster gave him no time to recover and pressed the attack relentlessly. Choi Hyuk fled from its onslaught, but his foot slipped on a rock and he fell. Before he could get up, he looked back and saw the monster charging at him again. He smiled. "This is fun," he murmured. The monster vented steam as it attacked even more ferociously. Choi Hyuk fully immersed himself in the battle, reading its movements and narrowly dodging or blocking each strike. The creature accelerated even further, but after releasing all its steam, its vigor began to fade. Meanwhile, Choi Hyuk had already deciphered his opponent's attack pattern. The exhausted bladed monster continued attacking with its 4 weapons. At that moment, its first 2 blades came down, and just as it was about to raise the third, its speed dropped slightly due to fatigue. Choi Hyuk's eyes gleamed. He squeezed every last drop of karma from his body and unleashed a slash with his Fang saber, striking from the shortest possible distance at maximum speed. He poured all of his strength into the blow. The Fang saber tore through the monster's neck and 2 of its arms. A system message appeared. You have surpassed 100 points in retribution. First user to improve retribution. You have received a new sovereign rating. You are now permitted to have up to 5 subordinates. If they follow you, their karma will increase by 20%. At last, his retribution had evolved. Choi Hyuk invested his remaining free karma points into stamina. This time, the points were applied without any penalty. The predator sword absorbed the blood of a worthy opponent. The blade rapidly drank in the bladed monster's blood, and its mummified body crumbled into dust. That dust passed through the portal it had been guarding and scattered into nothingness. The young man who had arrived first pointed at the portal and told Choi Hyuk that it needed to be destroyed. Choi Hyuk didn't respond. He simply examined the portal. Gripping the predator sword, he shattered the altar. With a violent vibration, the portal dissolved into smoke and vanished. Another system message appeared. First user to destroy a target. Reward: 2 additional karma points. New rule revealed. Each night, the number of monsters crossing portals increases by 20%. As Choi Hyuk processed the meaning of that increase, the young man shouted. He seemed to have reached the same conclusion. He began muttering calculations. By day 30, more than 1,000,000 monsters would have crossed over. Watching the man despair, Choi Hyuk thought that he was quick with numbers. He turned away, but the young man, still shaken, called out to him and said he knew Choi Hyuk would come. He told him that he had to go with him. The young man's name was Bai Sion, and he possessed the skill intuition. Bai Sion had been at the Veterans Hospital when everything began. He was drinking a can of soda on the rooftop when the sudden assembly announcement caused crowds to gather in the hospital parking lot. Some even tried to force their way inside, overpowering the security guards. Others spoke nonsense, claiming they had seen monsters. Just as he took a sip of his drink, Bai Sion felt an ominous premonition. A cold sweat ran down his back, and his heart began pounding violently. It felt as if he heard a scream from within himself. He couldn't catch his breath. Panicking, he rushed out of the hospital. His heart thundered, and his vision narrowed. Then he heard a scream, someone calling for help. An air conditioning unit fell to the ground as the earth shook. Moments later, deafening screams filled the air, and he saw people fleeing in terror from something chasing them. A monster the size of an apartment building suddenly appeared, spewing flames from its eyes and mouth, as if it had fallen from the sky. The Tyrannosaurus-like creature kicked the building next to the one where Bai Sion was hiding. The monster unleashed flames in a wide circle, incinerating everyone in its path. As it advanced, it swung its tail and rammed the hospital with its head, methodically burying people beneath the rubble. Behind it came a horde of monsters, hunting down those who tried to escape. People were chased and slaughtered by smaller, dinosaur-shaped creatures. Unable to do anything, Bai Sion stifled his screams and let tears stream down his face. Then, just as suddenly, the monster that had destroyed the hospital vanished. At that moment, Bai Sion received another message. The Wyvern of Destruction will reappear on the final day. The Wyvern of Destruction will guard the escape code. He explained to Choi Hyuk that his intuition only cared about his own survival. It didn't matter who else died, as long as he lived. Choi Hyuk listened thoughtfully as Bai Sion said they needed to form a suicide squad to destroy monster spawn portals in advance, and kill the Wyvern of Destruction. He told Choi Hyuk that he needed his help. At that moment, Choi Hyuk fell into deep thought. The Wyvern of Destruction, how could it be killed? Was it even possible to slay a monster the size of an apartment building with a sword? Perhaps it wasn't meant to be killed at all. Maybe the plan was to lure it out and escape instead. Even so, Choi Hyuk decided to kill the monster. It was fine if he had to start searching for a method now. He asked Bai Sion to guide him to the portal to verify whether his intuition was correct. Bai Sion showed a faintly hopeless expression. His intuition told him that the monsters there would be stronger than the ones here. He asked if it wouldn't be better to find more people first. Choi Hyuk merely shrugged. He said to think of it as a test. If Bai Sion wanted to stay with him, it would be a problem if he died fighting monsters of that level. Bai Sion seemed to have no other choice. Choi Hyuk shared his potions with Bai Sion, who drank them to restore his karma. They were fighting mountain orcs on a hillside. Bai Sion nearly died. Choi Hyuk decided to ask more about his intuition, whether it only reacted to his own safety, and how it could locate portals. Bai Sion replied that it was because he had decided to kill the Wyvern of Destruction. From that moment on, he fought by following his intuition, ignoring his heart's urge to find and rely on a safe group. After an entire day of gathering information while suppressing his intuition, a new intuition formed. It was likely pointing him toward a way to survive. Even after encountering the Wyvern of Destruction, he felt that if he found a portal and fought, someone would appear. And someone did. That person was Choi Hyuk. That was when he realized that his only chance of surviving the Wyvern of Destruction was Choi Hyuk. Choi Hyuk sympathized with Bai Sion. He especially liked that reckless idea of having to kill the Wyvern of Destruction. He asked why he wanted to do it. Bai Sion replied that he had always been an unfilial son. He planned to be one last time, by killing that lizard monster called the Wyvern. Choi Hyuk understood him better than anyone. He liked his thirst for vengeance. It reminded him of the brutality that had occurred at his school. The moment Choi Hyuk made his decision, a message appeared before Bai Sion, stating that Choi Hyuk wished to accept him as a follower. If he accepted, all of his karma points would increase by 20%. Bai Sion stared at Choi Hyuk with wide eyes. He studied his face, bit his lip once, and nodded. Choi Hyuk asked why he had said they needed a suicide squad. Bai Sion answered, "The number of monsters will increase tomorrow. It'll be even harder for just the two of us to clear the portals." Choi Hyuk rose to his feet, his body nearly recovered. Since it was clear that tomorrow would be worse, he decided the best option was to destroy as many portals as possible tonight, and prepared for battle. Meanwhile, Lee Jinhee decided not to fall asleep. She held a knife and waited for nightfall on her bed. The monsters attacking that place were Shadow Fangs. Their entire bodies were shrouded in black mist. They possessed exceptional stealth abilities, so people didn't notice them even when they passed right in front of their eyes. They only revealed their forms when they slit a sleeping person's throat and drank their blood. Every night 3 Shadow Fangs entered. Each one took a single life before disappearing. 3 at a time, 1 victim each. That was how it worked. Those who managed to see the Shadow Fangs tried to chase and kill them, but the monsters were faster. They slaughtered their pursuers and escaped. When people managed to surround one and strike its face, it began turning to dust starting from its mouth. Then it let out a strange screech to summon its companions, who rushed in from outside to rescue it. That day, there were 21 deaths and 7 injured. The people in the hospital split into those who wanted to fight and those who didn't. Where people fought, the Shadow Fangs screamed and called for reinforcements. Where they didn't fight, people still died. On the 3rd day, there were 3 more deaths. No one saw or heard anything. Lee Jinhee clenched her teeth. She didn't know how, but in just 3 nights everyone understood. 3 Shadow Fangs would enter, and each would kill 1 person. People looked away even if the person beside them was dying, because the moment they paid attention, the likelihood of the Shadow Fangs going into a frenzy, and killing them too, increased. A hoarse scream barely escaped the victim's torn throat. Lee Jinhee could hear the struggle of their immobilized body. A Shadow Fawn had slipped past her unnoticed, pounced on the victim, and slit their neck. Lee Jinhee sprang up and saw it. Someone lying next to the victim waved frantically, signaling her to sit back down. She gripped her knife and screamed at the top of her lungs, trying to wake everyone around her. The Shadow Fawn turned toward her and screeched. People who were still lying down tried to ignore the disturbance. The monster caught her knife and blocked her strike, attempting to evade her blows. Lee Jinhee pulled her leg back, preparing to counterattack, then kicked the Shadow Fawn, sending it flying with a crash. The Shadow Fawn was cunning. Realizing that Lee Jinhee's attacks were difficult to handle, it leapt away, slashing the throats of fleeing people as it escaped. But Lee Jinhee was formidable. Her awakened karma surged, boosting her energy as she charged after it. With a powerful slash, Li Jinhee split the monster in two from the torso. Soon after, criticism began pouring down on her. The man lying next to the victim shouted, asking what the hell she thought she was doing. Everyone ignored the fact that she had killed the Shadow Fang and instead turned on her, accusing her of being the reason 3 people were injured. She shot back that they couldn't just let people die. But the man asked if she had actually managed to save anyone. She had no answer. The victim lay motionless on the floor. The first person, the one whose throat the Shadow Fang had torn open, had already died from shock. She asked, "So if we offer someone else up as food, we're supposed to stay quiet and let it happen?" The man called her a rookie and asked who she thought she was, being so self-centered. He mentioned that just the day before she'd been talking about some portal while doing parkour. If she wanted to die, she should do it alone, without dragging others down with her. He poured out all the animosity he had built up. He couldn't forgive her pointless sense of justice, which had almost gotten him killed. Li Jinhee replied that if they stayed there like cowards, they would die eventually anyway. Right now, only one person was dying at a time, but what if that changed in the future? He asked if she really thought everyone stayed still because they lacked courage. If others died because of her arrogant sense of justice, then that wasn't justice. It was sheer stupidity. Li Jinhee felt the strength drain from her body. From a purely mathematical standpoint, he was right. If everyone stayed still, only one person would die. If they fought, many would die. She looked around for support, but found only evasive, cowardly gazes. Those who had grown close to the man over the past few days all spoke against her. She decided to leave. There was no point in arguing and making everyone suffer for nothing. She swallowed the boiling anger in her chest. She couldn't kill someone just because she was angry. Since her first year of middle school, she had practiced parkour, moving quickly through urban environments by overcoming obstacles with athletic movement. Now, she pushed past her limits using karma. Her stride was steady, her movements smooth and controlled. She stopped indoors. As her head cooled, embarrassment crept in. She was glad she had left before things got worse, but she had no plan. With no other choice, she kept walking. It was already too late to go back, so she decided to look for another gathering point at the next station. Suddenly, she heard noise, and the unmistakable smell of monster blood. From the darkness came the sounds of battle and screams. Desperate cries for help, directed at someone else. Li Jinhee hesitated, then peeked around the corner. At that moment, as if someone had heard her thoughts, a voice shouted for help. Instinctively, she ran toward the sound. It was Baek Sion, shouting Choi Hyuk's name while fighting off a group of monsters. Hyuk and Baek Sion were battling scaled creatures that looked as if they wore armor. Baek Sion asked for help as he defended himself with a shield and sword. Beside him, Choi Hyuk cut down monsters with ease in the subway. Baek Sion said these monsters were different. Normally, each portal was guarded by a single type of creature, but this one had multiple classes, tanks, spiders, and more. On top of that, the monsters were being commanded by a sub-boss using military-level tactics. Baek Sion called out to Hyuk, asking him to say something. At that moment, Choi Hyuk was sent flying into a wall by a monster's attack. By reflex, Baek Sion shouted Li Jinhee's name. She was hidden behind a wall, trying to understand the situation. When Baek Sion finally called out to her directly, desperately asking for help, she decided to step in. She saw Hyuk and Baek Sion fighting back to back, holding the monsters at bay. With Hyuk at the front, Li Jinhee charged into the enemy ranks to support them. With a downward slash, she stabbed one of the monsters through the head. She looked ahead in awe at Choi Hyuk. He had leapt into the air and was slaughtering the sub-boss, a bat-like creature with 4 eyes. When his sword pierced its skull, he followed through in one fluid motion, splitting its head in 2. Together, they quickly finished off the remaining monsters. Suddenly, a monster's head slammed into the wall behind Li Jinhee, thrown by Hyuk. As she stared, mouth agape, an additional rule was revealed. After 15 days, monsters will become organized. Choi Hyuk had destroyed more than 5 portals and revealed over 2 additional rules, earning a C-rank skill, Rising Slash. Li Jinhee ran up excitedly and called Choi Hyuk. Appa, she said. The way he jumped and killed monsters was an art she had never seen before. Hyuk looked confused by the nickname. She explained that anyone good at parkour deserved to be her Appa and begged him to teach her. Hyuk and Baek Sion explained that they planned to kill the Wyvern of Destruction, a monster the size of an apartment building. She was shocked that they would even dare challenge something so massive. But then she remembered that even without karma, They used to climb buildings with their bare hands. Now that they had karma, anything was possible. Hyuk and Baek Sion exchanged uneasy, confused looks. At Dunnan High School, Young Mi and Lee Jin-hee sat facing each other. Min Kyung-chu stood silently behind Young Mi. Young Mi asked whether the rumor about the enormous monster was true. Lee Jin-hee explained the two conditions for victory. First, destroy all portals and suppress the monsters. Second, kill the Wyvern of Destruction on the final day, or at least keep it occupied. Fail either, and obtaining the escape code would be impossible. Young Mi had almost decided. She asked one final question, whether the king without subjects had sent her, and demanded proof. A black flag appeared above Lee Jin-hee's head. It was Choi Hyuk's symbol. Seeing it, Young Mi accepted the proposal and smiled in relief. She declared that from that moment on, her forces would do everything possible to destroy portals, and that within a week she would dispatch her elite troops. Lee Jin-hee mentioned that the main gathering point was the Hanhee department store, where the greatest concentration of power was located. Young Mi said it wasn't far. Good news. They shook hands, sealing the agreement. During the first week, they destroyed 12 portals. But as the days passed, the fighting grew harder. The number of monsters increased exponentially each day, and those they failed to eliminate piled up uncontrollably. It was clear they had to stop this as soon as possible. Choi Hyuk decided to form a suicide squad and sent the extremely agile Lee Jin-hee as a messenger. She left Dunnan High with light steps. Young Mi watched as Jin-hee leapt effortlessly between buildings. Not a single movement wasted energy. In an instant, Lee Jin-hee vanished from sight, at a speed even monsters couldn't match. Young Mi asked the veteran Young Jin to summon the kings. 4 kings gathered. Aside from her, there were 3 kings at Dunnan High: Slave King Simon, Student King Min Kyung-chu, and Pig King Ma Dong-ik, the man Lee Jin-hee had fought before. Young Mi announced her plan to deploy troops to destroy portals and form a suicide squad to support Choi Hyuk. Min Kyung-chu asked how many troops she intended to send. She replied that she would send as many as possible to destroy as many portals as they could. Young Mi had already decided to cooperate. Even if it meant losses on her side, reducing the total number of casualties was the priority. That was who she was. If, on the final day, the gates of hell opened and countless people were slaughtered by monsters and the Wyvern of Destruction, she knew she wouldn't be able to bear it. Pig King Ma Dong-ik objected. He suggested pretending to act instead of actually doing so, since they wouldn't be the only ones fighting. Young Mi replied coldly, "They wouldn't be the only ones. But what if everyone thought like you? Then everyone would die." The cowardly Pig King asked why they had to be the ones to step up. As he spoke, he watched Young Mi carefully. Though Young Minji was younger than Lee Jin-hee, who had fiercely rebuked him days earlier, he still had to treat her with respect. It made his stomach churn. She wasn't someone he could control. Ma Dong-ik argued they couldn't fight either the portal monsters or the Wyvern of Destruction. They had already suffered enough losses. They had families to protect. Furious, Young Mi drew her sword. She asked if he would rather fight her troops than the monsters. She made it clear she hadn't gathered them to debate. The room froze. After a long silence, Ma Dong-ik spoke again. He said he understood, but asked her to reconsider the number of people being sent. Many wanted to reunite with their families, and they couldn't let all of them fall into mourning at once. He proposed sending 1 person per family. Young Mi rejected it, pointing out that there were also students who hadn't been able to find their families, and there would be no exceptions. With enough karma, even the elderly could run and fight. Ma Dong-ik's face twisted at her words. Young Mi continued, "If you're weak you die. That's the kind of game this is." Ma Dong-ik nearly slammed the table in rage, but barely restrained himself. He forced a smile and said he understood. The scene shifted to Baek Sion and Choi Hyuk, rummaging through a supply box. 3 thugs approached, asking who they thought they were, crawling around there. Sion noticed them immediately, and Hyuk turned as well. Seeing them, Hyuk suggested dividing the supplies fairly, since both groups had arrived at the same time. The thugs stared at his outstretched hand in shock. The one in the center soon twisted his lips into a malicious grin and glared at them. More gang members approached, surrounding them. Sion looked around in surprise and told Hyuk the situation seemed dangerous, though his intuition wasn't reacting. Hyuk laughed. Above the gangsters' heads was the symbol of an axe, typical of their group. In his mind, he was already deciding which one of the 20 surrounding them he would leave alive for questioning. Just then, someone shouted from behind the gangsters, telling them to stop. A man in a military uniform and glasses stepped forward and ordered the thugs to lower their hands. Behind him stood 3 others dressed the same way. One of the gang members muttered, It's the Comrades in Arms Association. The soldier suddenly clapped. He looked at Choi Hyuk and Baek Sion and told them to consider themselves lucky civilians. Then he turned to the gangsters and said that, since he knew their meeting spot was nearby but they had come from far away, he proposed dividing the items fairly. The gang leader cursed and started sweating. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pistol, firing at the ceiling. Glaring threateningly at the soldiers, he told them it wasn't their business and aimed the gun at them, ordering them to leave. The soldier silently observed the pistol. With a wide smile, he revealed a missing tooth. Suddenly, the men with him began drawing various weapons. The soldier brought a hand to his ear and mocked them, saying he couldn't hear the gangsters because he was too old. Meanwhile, his companions positioned themselves beside him with an array of weapons, intimidating the thugs. The gang leader was frozen in shock, unable to speak. The soldier declared that they would split the items in a 2-to-1 ratio, keeping the larger share. Then he looked at Hyuk and said that, as civilians, it would be best for them to leave immediately. At this, Hyuk let out a mocking laugh. The two leaders looked at each other in surprise as Hyuk began laughing maniacally. With a single step he vanished. The others were stunned. They hadn't even seen him move. Without warning, Hyuk appeared in front of a gangster and, with a single blow, blew his head apart. Blood splattered the man next to the lifeless body. With another swift strike, Hyuk attacked a second man, breaking his back. At that moment, another gangster approached with a gun aimed at Hyuk's head. Hyuk, however, sensed the exact moment he was about to pull the trigger. With a swift move, he disarmed him, leaving him screaming in pain. The other gangsters were stunned but quickly reacted, shouting to each other to shoot Hyuk. Yet, one punch after another, their heads exploded and scattered across the floor. Blood painted the walls red as they fell one by one. The soldiers watched in complete silence, realizing this was a literal massacre. The elderly soldier leading the group even began to sweat, wondering who the hell this kid really was. Baek Sion struggled to catch his breath as he pulled something from under his shirt. He looked at the protective necklace Hyuk had given him. Without it, he would have died in an instant under the hail of bullets. Hyuk stood silently amidst the bloody chaos he had created. Then he looked at a surviving gangster cornered against the wall, trembling with fear. The man, utterly terrified, begged Hyuk to stop. Hyuk grabbed him by the neck and lifted him into the air. As the gangster struggled to speak, Hyuk asked where their headquarters was. Stammering, the man said it was in the KT building and begged again for his life. Hyuk asked if he hadn't considered the consequences when he chose to attack him with a gun. The gangster kept screaming for help, but Hyuk snapped his neck without mercy and dropped him to the ground. The supply boxes were all open and visible. Hyuk spoke to the soldier, saying everything should be divided fairly. One of the soldiers was about to complain, but the elder stopped him and immediately agreed with Hyuk's proposal. He said Hyuk was an incredible young man, just as he'd heard. Meanwhile, Sion observed the bodies and noticed that one had a speed enchantment. He remarked that it was a waste for something like that to end up in a gangster's hands. Enchantments were unique jewel-like items engraved into the skin upon use. They were extremely valuable, limited to stat boosts. They functioned as an additional method to increase attributes, and could be stacked up to 5 of the same grade, similar to retribution points. Choi Hyuk currently had a combination of 3 control enchantments and 1 resistance enchantment. He also had the speed ring and vigor ring. Sion left the body alone, realizing there was nothing more to take. Suddenly, he looked at the soldiers inspecting the supply boxes. They seemed happy, calculating their gains for the day. Sion approached Hyuk and called his name. He asked if Hyuk planned to eliminate the gangsters immediately. If so, he suggested taking the old army men as spectators. Noticing Hyuk's confusion, Sion explained they needed to start demonstrating their power. People would only dare to fight the Wyvern of Destruction if they saw a real chance alongside Hyuk. Hearing Sion's intent to showcase their team, Hyuk thought for a moment and asked if the soldiers would even watch. Sion said they could offer a few gifts as incentives. He approached the soldiers, calling them grandpas, and said they were going to clean out the gangsters. He asked if they wanted to watch. The soldiers looked at each other, confused. The leader asked why they should. Sion explained that they might not know yet, but they had already requested an alliance with their leader. For that reason, Sion hoped they could observe their skills and comment later. The soldiers said they had already seen how incredible their abilities were, but Sion downplayed it. He pulled out an item card and said they wouldn't let them leave empty-handed as a gesture of friendship. After discussing it among themselves, the soldiers agreed. Sion smiled at their response. Seeing Hyuk move out, the soldiers asked in surprise if they were leaving immediately. Sion confirmed. The soldier looked baffled, 2 people against an entire building of gangsters seemed absurd. Convinced, he thought Hyuk must have reinforcements elsewhere. However, when they reached the enemy base, the soldier couldn't help asking where the others were. Sion simply told them not to worry and watch from a distance. He insisted they not move. The soldiers grew uneasy. They thought these young men didn't value their own lives, yet they didn't seem like that type. Sion ran to Hyuk and called him. He asked if they weren't going to infiltrate, since it looked like Hyuk would enter through the front door. Seeing Hyuk confused, Sion explained it would be difficult to distinguish friends from enemies in a frontal fight, and that it wasn't right to kill people forced to cooperate with gangsters. Hyuk replied that collaborators were no different from gangsters. Sion was shocked. Hyuk added that he didn't kill those who didn't cooperate. Sion fell into deep thought. Using that method, civilians wouldn't understand what was happening and might oppose Choi Hyuk. He remembered the Japanese invasion, when people collaborated with the empire just to survive. Could they be considered innocent by their own definition? To what extent could the desire to live be justified? Hyuk called Sion, telling him not to misinterpret things. They weren't there out of kindness. They were there because it was necessary. It was simply a group that had chosen to fight. Sion was far softer than Hyuk. In Hyuk's heart, the word revenge was engraved. He believed those who bowed their heads in fear of gangsters would be of little help, even against the Wyvern. In a situation where supplies were insufficient, uniting everyone wasn't practical, and reducing numbers when possible was more efficient. When Hyuk approached the gangsters, they noticed him and Sion. One asked lazily what they were doing there. Hyuk stared and said they had come to hunt gangsters. The man's face turned red with rage as he cursed, but Hyuk immediately punched him, destroying his face completely. Seeing the decapitated body, the 2 behind tried to flee. One was too slow and lost his head. The other, wearing a green tracksuit, blew a whistle, alerting the entire base to the intruders. All the gangsters stopped what they were doing and turned toward the sound. Meanwhile, Hyuk aimed his sword at a kneeling man, who asked if they were really there to hunt gangsters, and if so, he wished to join them. Thus, the 3 entered the KKT building zone, where about 1,300 people had gathered. Of them, 500 were gangsters, and 800 were ordinary civilians. Although the gangsters had many legal and moral issues, being experienced fighters made them fairly brave, even against monsters. Thanks to them, the place was the safest, even compared to monsters. However, it was by no means a free place for ordinary people. The gangsters excluded civilians. They monopolized information and items that only benefited themselves. It didn't take long before the gangsters became the rulers of the place, revealing their true nature. Hyuk was furious at what was happening. He shouted that, since the gangsters had tried to kill him, he had come for revenge. Looking at the shocked people, he told them that if they had nothing to do with it, they should leave. Both gangsters and civilians looked at Hyuk, wondering who he was. The person behind Hyuk thought, fearfully, that it was a shame only 2 had come. He shook his head, admitting he couldn't do much, but preferred to fight the gangsters than be killed by them. Looking down at Hyuk, the gangsters began murmuring, calling him crazy. Hyuk sensed the thirst for blood in their eyes. He just smiled at the thick scent of blood in the air. He drew his sword faster than anyone could react and lunged forward. Heads rolled left and right wherever Hyuk passed. The remaining gangsters watched the terrifying scene and began to tremble. They tried to flee, but it was too late. Hyuk was already on top of them, cutting them cleanly without effort. One who had managed to get slightly away tried to beg Hyuk and asked for help. Hyuk ignored the plea and cut him in half with a clean slash. The man had stayed silent when Hyuk appeared weak, but immediately began begging when he saw Hyuk was strong. At that moment, someone approached stealthily from behind with a weapon. Just as it touched Hyuk's head, he heard it clearly. The man was utterly shocked, unable to believe what he saw. Before he realized it, someone appeared behind him and pierced him through the back. The attacker continued striking while cursing him. Then they glanced briefly at Hyuk, silently. Hyuk said nothing and passed by. The man felt some hostility but not excessive. He could fight, but he wasn't an enemy, so Hyuk spared him. However, just in front of Hyuk, another person stabbed a gangster in the back. Holding the knife, he also looked silently at Hyuk. This time, Hyuk glared coldly. Terrified, the man asked what criteria Hyuk followed if he even killed those who attacked gangsters. In that instant, Hyuk had already sliced his neck and kept advancing. As he fell, the man wondered why it had been him. Hyuk surveyed the building, full of bloodthirsty malice. Soon, the clean walls were covered in blood and destruction. Hyuk's face was no exception. Bodies lay scattered across the floor as Hyuk approached the final room. He slowly opened the door. The moment he stepped inside, several people aimed knives at his neck. The gang leader sat at the back, muscular and imposing. He cursed Hyuk, trembling with rage, and asked why he was still alive. Hyuk looked at his sword and saw its durability was low. Without concern, he threw it to the ground. The blade shattered on impact. The gang leader told him to surrender. Before he could speak further, Hyuk had already crossed the room and delivered a crushing kick to his head, smashing it against the wall. The others were shocked by the speed of the attack. While they shouted in concern for their leader, he lay on the ground, head destroyed and covered in blood. Hyuk's face darkened as he looked at the corpse. He looked up coldly and declared the leader pathetic. In the KTT Mall, the battle had finally ended. Sion grabbed a bag of items and called the soldiers, giving it to them as a gift. The soldier accepted with an impassive expression, but behind his glasses, he was sweating profusely. It reminded him of a completely uneven battle he had witnessed before, a massacre. He thought he had seen everything, but what happened in KTT Mall was brutal, on another level. After the battle ended and the loot was collected, the soldiers bid farewell to Hyuk and Sion. Before leaving, Sion stopped them for a moment and asked them to report in detail everything they had seen to their leader once they returned. The soldiers turned, their faces sweaty, and promised they would. On the 10th day, Hyuk and Swan continued killing monsters as usual. The number of monsters Hyuk eliminated daily was absurd, yet still insufficient to turn the tide. Giving his all, he could hunt around 400 monsters per day. That day, 20,000 monsters emerged from the 30 portals. But that wasn't all. Every 10 days, the amount of supplies was reduced by 1/3. Resources that could originally feed 500,000 people were now enough for only about 170,000. However, there were still 300,000 survivors on the 10th day. Although they weren't starving, scarcity heightened both temptation and tension. The main cause of the conflict was the portals. Destroying them was necessary but extremely dangerous. For this reason, the death toll continued to rise among groups allied with Choi Hyuk, while zones that only sought to hoard supplies became increasingly safe. While some fought for others sought to exploit the situation, forcing Minji to raise her sword. She sent an envoy to a neighboring meeting zone. The envoy arrived at the base and delivered Minji's order. They had to lead the destruction of a portal the next day or lose the right to keep their supplies. Upon hearing this, the local leader's face darkened. He let out a mocking laugh and said the envoy of the Mad Night King must be equally insane. The envoy didn't react and silently looked ahead before returning to report to Minji. Another envoy, who had just returned, asked Minji if they should kill them all. Minji responded coldly that everyone should be killed except those under 14. The subordinate, confused, asked how they would determine age. Minji was silent for a moment before hesitantly replying that they should spare those who appeared young. The subordinate asked again if they should also kill the parents. Minji was firm. They must be killed without mercy. Although Minji felt empathy for the weak, she wasn't sure she could kill those who surrendered, so she left command in the hands of Chu Young-jin. Even hardening her heart, she couldn't bear the death of children. Despite the respect she inspired, this ambiguity naturally drew ridicule. Still, her decisive actions demonstrated astonishing power. For example, the heads of the leaders of the opposing meeting zones were cut off, impaled on blades, and displayed in front of the burning building. Neighboring zones, shocked by her ruthless massacre, decided to join the fight against the monsters. With Choi Hyuk's slaughter and Minji's display of power, Allied forces could exploit that fear to win over other groups more easily. It wasn't long before everyone began destroying the portals. By day 15, the number of portals had dropped to 20, but over 30,000 monsters appeared in a single day, and their numbers continued to rise. There were now 250,000 survivors and about 130,000 monsters. It had become inevitable that at some point, the number of monsters would easily surpass the number of humans. Choi Hyuk observed the rank C skill called Rising Slash. He couldn't use it yet since it required at least one stat and his retribution points to reach rank C. When his stats and retribution points surpassed 200, they evolved to 2 stars, and his stats stopped increasing from killing normal 1-star monsters. Even when defeating mid-tier bosses, called 2-star monsters, his stats didn't automatically rise to the next star. It required 100 points to go from 2 stars around 200 points, meaning he needed 300 points to reach 3 stars. At that pace, using Rising Slash would be impossible. But without that skill, he wouldn't have a Carmen Fused Blade, meaning no area attacks. It was practically impossible to raise a stat and retribution points to 300 before day 30. Thus, his last resort was to improve his control stat. Until now, the best approach had been to increase his stats evenly. However, things had changed due to a new rule. The number of monsters spawning from the portals would increase by 20%. No matter how strong or fast he was, he simply couldn't face all the monsters. He needed an overwhelming breakthrough. If someone saw this as a game, the tutorial had ended, and it was time to choose a class. The higher his control stat, the easier Hyuk could manipulate karma. At this point, he could control not only his strength and speed but also his karma. Hyuk exhaled deeply and clenched his fist. His punch hit a truck, sending it flying and splitting it in two. Then he pushed upward with his palm, releasing a gust of air that tore off the wall of a distant building. Seeing the destruction, he paused for a moment. Suddenly, he felt a crack. A bone in his hand had broken. That explosive blow had exceeded his resistance, and his arm couldn't bear the load. His control was at 148 points, so he decided to focus and attempt something. He raised his sword and stabilized his stance. With a scream, he tried to use Rising Slash. Karma from his body began flowing into his arm, gathering in his palm, then transferring to the sword. For a moment, Hyuk could see the paths and directions the karma traveled, hoping for a positive result. He took a deep breath and aimed the sword forward. His foot planted firmly in the ground cracked the pavement from the pressure emanating from his body. Rock fragments began floating around him. He closed his eyes and forced himself to focus. Feeling a force pulling the sword's hilt, he knew it was time. With a heavy lift, he forced all the karma into the blade. The sword glowed with an intense blue light, almost blinding Hyuk. But after a blink, he could see it clearly. In a fraction of a second, a blue blade formed from the karma filling the sword. The exhaustion from using karma was extreme, and he fell to his knees. Gasping, exhausted, he looked ahead. Yet a smile appeared on his face. He finally could do it. He could create a karma blade without needing a skill. There were 7 allied groups with Choi Hyuk, Youngmi's troops, the Comrades in Arms Alliance, the Korean National Sports University Knights, Shineong Fortress, Kango River Park Fortress, Hyundai Siansa Park Fortress, and Chian Huahai Shopping Mall Fortress. All allied forces gathered at Haiyan High Mall. Initially, they had discussed forming a suicide squad, but a new rule forced complete unification. The rule stated that monsters would begin acting in groups, so uniting was necessary. Moreover, supplies would drastically decrease every 10 days, making unification convenient administratively. However, if the week's barriers collapsed, there would be no way to face the monster horde. The more groups there were, the faster the week's barriers would be consumed. Thus, all forces, a total of 130,000 people, began gathering at Hunehei. They chose Hunhee Mall because there was a healer there. When everything began, the hospital functioned normally. However, the system indicated that those in the hospital couldn't leave unless they killed 3 patients. At first, everyone was shocked by the doctor's absurd words, as the patients couldn't see the message. Yet eventually, the incident unfolded similarly to the rebirth ring scenario. When they confirmed they truly couldn't leave, chaos erupted. The scariest part was that no one could know what was happening outside the hospital. By the 4th day, food and rations were nearly depleted. Seeing the patients asleep, the doctors raised knives, their hearts full of guilt. In a single night, they lost all dignity they had maintained before and attacked the weakest patients. The strongest and healthiest patients weren't much different. Finally, someone died. Someone was deliberately murdered. Seeing this, the head doctor exploded in rage. He declared that the others had no right to call themselves doctors while brandishing a baseball bat to keep them away from the patients. The others tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. Maintaining a high guard, he retreated to the patient room. Once inside, he locked the door to prevent other doctors from entering. He even pushed an empty bed against it for reinforcement. The patients were completely alarmed. Yet the head doctor turned with a kind look. He told everyone not to worry and assured them they would be safe. On the 5th day, he left the room. He saw a colleague sitting in the hallway, guilt written on his face, but ignored him as he pushed a medical cart. By the 7th day, even intravenous fluids began to run out. At that moment, a system notification appeared, calculating his retribution points. It stated he was now classified as a healer, as he hadn't killed any patients and continued caring for them. The doctor was shocked to see the message. At the same time, the lying patients began disintegrating into particles of light. Golden particles filled the room as the head doctor screamed in agony, watching patients die one by one. Every time light was absorbed into his body, his retribution points and karma increased, especially his control and recovery stats. Yet Dr. Bei Ji-man felt no joy. He only saw the figures of the patients disappearing. Tears ran down his face as he realized that, in the end, everyone had died. With a heart-wrenching scream, he fell to his knees, marking the birth of the only healer of Kong district. Atop HYH Mall, G-Man stood on the roof with arms outstretched. He opened his eyes with burning determination and shouted for everyone to rise. His voice carried power and echoed downward, reaching every soldier watching. In his hands he held a mass of sacred light, releasing luminous particles toward the ground. These light particles fell on the soldiers, revitalizing and strengthening them. All began chanting in unison as G-Man continued blessing them. The skill get-up was a support ability increasing courage, awareness, and camaraderie. Everyone experiencing the scene simultaneously felt deep security and unity. For those living in constant cruelty, the comfort this ability offered was greater than expected. After casting the skill, G-Man withdrew his hands, and the glow faded. As he stepped back, the leader of the HYH Mall Assembly stepped forward to give a motivational speech to the army. He said only 13 days remained. Currently, 19 portals were left, and around 40,000 monsters emerged from them each night. He asked if their strength was truly so limited, and if this was all the power humans had, reaching the top without fangs or tough hides. He demanded they show the monsters how strong they were. It was time to prove their value and power to the unknown creators of the game. He then gave orders. The squires would block the front. The spearmen would attack with thrusts. The swordsmen would finish off the enemies. Ranged attackers would stay behind the lines and follow the commander's orders. Meanwhile, the support unit would reinforce the faltering front lines. With all troops in position, he finally shouted it was time to advance. With a final war cry, the entire army readied itself for the approaching monster horde. A massive shadow loomed over the shield bearers at the front. Looking up, a bull charged their defenses at terrifying speed, throwing everything aside. Behind it, nightmare creatures leapt, swords attached to their hands. The commander told everyone not to fear and ordered them forward, but the creatures were too fast to be effectively countered. The battle began in extreme chaos and disorder. Yet the humans weren't completely defenseless. As one soldier shouted at his comrades to hold the line, he pointed at the suicide squad and told the others not to fall behind. If they did, the squad would surely die. A soldier killed multiple enemies by throwing spears like javelins. Meanwhile, swordsmen pierced and attacked with their rapiers at absurd speeds. In another corner of the battlefield, a bald man in heavy armor grabbed an enemy's head and threw him into others. The battle went well, but the silhouettes of the dark creatures lurked ominously in the shadows. Now, don't forget to subscribe for part 2. Thanks for watching.